Chapter 571. Unsurprisingly, the muscle tendon changing scripture set off a new wave of bidding. 60,000 gold coins. 150,000 gold coins. 250,000 gold coins. 300,000 gold coins. 10 minutes. In just 10 minutes, the price had soared to 300,000 gold coins. Gaia's base price had no value at all. The first two bids were the only benchmark for players to bid. 400,000 gold coins. Lin Jing finally made a bid. It was the same price as the Tai sword, reaching the first hurdle. The entire auction hall came to a standstill. A little bit later, an even bigger wave was set off. 400,000 gold coins was not enough to scare them off. There were only 10 items to be auctioned in the annual auction. It was considered lucky to get even one. Therefore, all the big shots who were prepared would not miss a single opportunity. 420,000 gold coins. 450,000 gold coins. The players' bids were still soaring. They had no intention of stopping. Finally, a hint of seriousness flashed across Lin Jing's face. She did not expect the muscle tendon changing scripture to cause such a frenzy. Everyone in the hall seemed to have gone mad. They could not help but wonder if Gaia had put the best auction items in the front. Everyone was full of energy. 600,000 gold coins. Lin Jing's second bid was the same as the final price of the magic bean talisman. She wanted to use this strategy to force some people to back off. At the same time, she also wanted to use this opportunity to show all potential competitors that she was determined to get the muscle tendon changing scripture. As expected, after Lin Jing made her bid, all the players became cautious. Even for a big guild, 600,000 gold coins was not a huge sum of money that could be easily spent. Moreover, it was only an internal cultivation technique that could only be practiced by one person. No one could really spend the guild's public funds as they pleased. Lin Jing's bid of 600,000 gold coins was close to the limit of the guild funds that she could use. Last year, she had spent a huge sum of money to bid for the 7-star dragon well, which had already caused quite a stir in the guild. Fortunately, Ouyang Shua had opened Cliff Mountain City to the public, and Lin Jing had gone through a series of operations to eliminate the negative effects. Everyone was paying close attention to the auction record that Lord Chunshan had just set. Would he break it again? Outside the Jingdu auction house, this grand auction was also being broadcasted in real time. When Lin Jing made another bid of 600,000 gold coins, the entire central street was in an uproar. The exclamations of the players gathered together like an avalanche. To these ordinary players who worked hard to set up their stalls, 600,000 gold coins was an astronomical figure. Everyone was witnessing a legend of wealth. 650,000 gold coins. Myths were meant to be broken. The bidder was unexpectedly Lord Chunshan, who had just won the Scattering Beans Army Talisman. This was beyond everyone's expectations. Lord Chunshan's wealth completely intimidated the group of people. Even Ouyang Shua could not help but glance at the second room next door. This time, Lord Chunshan's family had steeled their hearts. They were going to make a huge gamble in the game. 700,000 gold coins. Before the first wave subsided, another wave arose. Lord Chunshan had just called out a price when a third person once again broke it. He increased the price by another 50,000 gold coins. The charm of the muscle tendon changing scripture was beyond imagination. The bidder this time was also a member of the Yan Huang Alliance. It was Feng Qingyang. No one was surprised by this. Feng Qingyang was famous for being a martial arts fanatic. It was already surprising that he had given up on the Tai sword. Feng Qingyang did not care about giving up on the muscle tendon changing scripture. This was because even the best internal energy cultivation technique of his family could not be compared to the muscle tendon changing scripture. More importantly, Feng Qingyang had already found out that the muscle tendon changing scripture had a hidden characteristic. It could greatly increase the attributes of a player's root bone. To Feng Qingyang, who was dedicated to martial arts, there was nothing more important than the muscle tendon changing scripture. It was precisely because of this that he had given up on the Tai Yi sword long ago. Of course, this also had to do with the fact that the Tai Yi sword was not compatible with Feng Qingyang's swordsmanship. Among the 10 famous swords, Feng Qingyang was most interested in the shadow-bearing sword, which was ranked last. The shadow-bearing sword was a sword with shadow and incorporeal forms. It was the most unpredictable. Seeing that the price of the muscle tendon changing scripture had soared to 700,000 gold coins, Lin Jing and Xie Xiyun looked at each other and smiled bitterly. They had given up on the competition. Lin Jing was not a willful person. It was not that they could not afford 700,000 gold coins, but it was not worth it. Moreover, to Lin Jing, the muscle tendon changing scripture was not the most suitable internal energy cultivation technique. There was no need for him to walk down this path to the end. On the other hand, Lord Chuanshen's expression was somewhat thought-provoking. If it had been someone else who had made the bid, Lord Chuanshen would have increased the price without hesitation. However, it was Feng Qingyang who had made the bid. Feng Qingyang could be considered as one of Lord Chuanshen's more reliable allies within the Yan-Huang alliance. The problem was that Lord Chuanshen also desired the muscle tendon changing scripture very much. Martial arts was not Lord Chuanshen's pursuit. Practicing an internal energy cultivation technique like the muscle tendon changing scripture was very suitable for Lord Chuanshen to strengthen his body. Coupled with the fact that he had ample funds, it would be difficult for him to give up. Everyone was waiting for Lord Chuanshen to make another bid. Lord Chuanshen was not the only one who had not given up on the muscle tendon changing scripture. The others were merely observing the battle between Lord Chuanshen and Feng Qingyang before making their move. Only the auctioneer was counting down according to the rules of the auction house. 700,000 gold coins going once. Lord Chuanshen did not respond. His expression was somewhat unfathomable. 700,000 gold coins going twice. Lord Chuanshen raised his head, glanced at Feng Qingyang, and opened his mouth to speak. The gazes of the entire audience converged on box number 2. Looking at his expression, Lord Chuanshen was about to make his move. The other players were gearing up for battle, preparing for the final battle. 700,000 gold coins going thrice. At this moment, the auctioneer banged the gavel. Unexpectedly, Lord Chuanshen did not make a bid, and directly gave up on this battle. The entire audience was in an uproar. Some people finally reacted. They were afraid that they had been tricked by Lord Chuanshen. Perhaps, when the auctioneer first called out a bid, Lord Chuanshen was indeed hesitating. But on the second bid, Lord Chuanshen had already decided to give up. At the same time, he had given Feng Qingyang a beautiful assist, allowing Feng Qingyang to bid for the muscle tendon changing scripture at the lowest price. At this moment, the big shots were extremely vexed. Unfortunately, the dust had already settled. Being tricked could only mean that they were too greedy. As for Feng Qingyang, he gave Lord Chuanshen a brilliant smile. Chapter 572. Lord Chuanshen was indeed a shrewd person. Between personal strength and the family's hegemony, he chose the latter. He gave up the muscle tendon changing scripture to win Feng Qingyang's friendship. This was not a bad deal. Lord Chuanshen had clearly thought it through. This time, the family was going all out. He could not afford to be willful. All his actions had to serve the family's hegemony. As for his personal gains and losses, he could not care less. In the end, Feng Qingyang successfully won the muscle tendon changing scripture at the sky-high price of 700,000 gold coins. The first 3 items were each stronger than the last. The players' hearts could not take it. Finally, Gaia slowed down the pace of the auction. The 4th item was a substitute doll. In the first auction, Ouyang Shua had won the substitute doll for 250 gold coins. At that time, the players had not realized the value of the substitute doll. Now, the substitute doll had become the top collector's item in the hands of the players. A treasure that could allow players to reincarnate without any damage became even more precious in the later stages of the game. The players could only feel at ease when they held a few substitute dolls in their hand. However, substitute dolls were extremely difficult to obtain. Only by going through a specific large-scale chain mission and putting in a lot of effort could one obtain a substitute doll as a reward. According to incomplete statistics, in the second year of Gaia, the number of substitute dolls that appeared in China did not exceed 20. This showed how rare substitute dolls were. Therefore, although it did not trigger a bidding frenzy like the first 3 items, the substitute doll still caused an intense competition. In the end, it was successfully won by a player at the sky-high price of 200,000 gold coins. As a result, a new round of bidding frenzy for the substitute doll was launched. There was no doubt that in the third year of Gaia and beyond, more and more professional mission teams would be born. They would specialize in researching related chain missions to obtain substitute dolls and become rich. As long as one obtained one, becoming rich overnight would no longer be a fantasy. The auctioneer was still smiling brightly. His efficiency was abnormally high. Following that, the auction for the 5th item began. When the red cloth was removed, it was a simple and unadorned book. As long as it was a book, be it a martial arts manual or a technical manual, not a single item was lacking. The player's interest was piqued once again. Mongolian Cavalier Training Manual. Once you use it, you will obtain the full set of secret training techniques for Mongolian cavaliers, and you will be able to create a group of Mongolian elite cavaliers in your territory. The starting price is 6,000 gold coins. There is no fixed price. Please bid. The auctioneer said. There were 2 ways to train a special force in a player's territory. First, the relevant generals could train themselves. For example, by Qi's personal guard Iron Eagle Swordsman. Secondly, it was through the relevant training manuals. The Mongolian Iron Cavalry Training Manual belonged to this category. It was suitable for generals who lacked the necessary equipment. As long as they had the necessary equipment, even an ordinary general could be trained into a special soldier. Therefore, any lord with some knowledge would realize the value of this handbook. The lords of the north, in particular, had burning gazes. The lords of the south generally lacked good warhorses. If the warhorses could not compare to the Mongolian warhorses, then even if the cavaliers trained well, they would not be able to reach the fighting strength of the Mongolian elite cavaliers in history. Even in Shanghai City, the number of cyan beetle horses could not keep up with the expansion of the territory's cavalry. Ouyang Shua had long been planning to find a new source of warhorses. It was a pity that he had little success. The northern territories were different. They were close to the Mongolian plains and could trade horses with the tribes there. At this time, the Mongolian plains had not yet welcomed that unparalleled king. The most intense bids came from the lords of the north. 120,000 gold coins. 250,000 gold coins. 400,000 gold coins. The price once again rose to a level that made the normal lords despair. The only ones who still had the strength to bid were Army Kill Ripper and Dichen. It was another internal PK within the Yan-Huang alliance. In this auction, the Yan-Huang alliance was in the limelight. Whether it was Army Kill Ripper's Azura City or Dichen's Handan City, they were not far from the Mongolian plains. Their desire for the handbook was naturally stronger, especially Army Kill Ripper. He had been silent for too long, and was slowly fading out of the public eye. This auction might be an opportunity for him to rise again. Therefore, Army Kill Ripper ignored Dichen's gaze and continued to bid, showing that he wanted to fight with Dichen to the end. 450,000 gold coins. Army Kill Ripper yelled. Dichen's face was a little ugly. Due to other considerations, his family did not buy a lot of things, so he did not have as much money as the others. 500,000 gold coins. This was Di Chen's limit. 550,000 gold coins. Army Kill Ripper was very confident. Seeing this, Di Chen's face was expressionless, as if he had given up. When the dust settled, Army Kill Ripper successfully won the Mongolian Iron Cavalry Training Manual. Perhaps it would not be long before a powerful cavalry was born in Azura City. In the blink of an eye, the auction was more than half done. Some people were happy, some were disappointed. The one who had the most profit was the Yan Huang Alliance, who had monopolized 3 items. The second half of the auction was destined to be even more bloody. After a short break, the show began again. The 6th beauty walked up and lifted the red silk cloth on the tray. It was another book. Glass Making Manual. After using it, you will be able to master the technique of glass making. The starting price is 40,000 gold coins, no fixed price, please bid. The auctioneer introduced. Glass was not a modern material, it had existed since ancient times. It was just that in ancient times it was very difficult to make glass. Glass had always been a luxury that could be compared to gold and gems, and only a few of the upper class could enjoy it. Gaia's products were naturally not ordinary. The method of making glass in the Glass Making Manual was better than the method of making glass in ancient China, and was only slightly inferior to the modern method. Therefore, once a territory mastered this technique, it was equivalent to having another way to make money. The monopoly of technology was far stronger than the monopoly of funds. Therefore, for the lords who had a lot of money in their hands, they could use their funds to buy the glass-making manual, and then open up a way to make money. There was no doubt that it was a very good investment. The value of gold coins was constantly depreciating, and the monopoly of technology was very difficult to break due to the limitations of the technology tree in the game. Therefore, even Ouyang Shual was a little tempted. Unfortunately, he was powerless. Chapter 573. The glass manufacturing technique manual triggered a new round of bidding frenzy. In less than 20 minutes, the price had once again soared to 400,000 gold coins. Ouyang Shual suspected that Gaia was using this auction to collect large amounts of gold coins. Other than the substitute doll, there was not a single item that was sold for less than 400,000 gold coins. It was truly terrifying. 550,000 gold coins. The one who bid was Xiongba, who had been silent all this while. This price was already close to the limit. Originally, Lord Chunshin wanted to fight for it. The problem was, Xiongba had already taken a step back on the issue of the Magic Bean Army seal. If he continued to fight, it would be somewhat ridiculous. Finally, the glass manufacturing technique manual fell into Xiongba's hands. Yan Huang Alliance had won another round. The 7th item up for auction was a huge gem. Giant Space Stone. It can increase the storage space of the storage bag to 10,000 cubic meters. The starting price is 40,000 gold coins, no fixed price, please bid. The auctioneer introduced. Ouyang Shua's storage bag was made of a large space stone, with a capacity of 1,000 cubic meters. This large space stone was just right for him. Thinking of the upcoming voyage plan, Ouyang Shual was moved for the first time. Auntie, lend me 200,000 gold coins. Ouyang Shual said. Lin Jing did not bid for the Yijin Jing, but she had ample funds. You want this space stone? Lin Jing asked Ouyang Shual. That's right. Okay. Lin Jing was straightforward. Speaking of which, she had to borrow money from Ouyang Shual to bid for the 7-star Dragon Abyss last year. It was not easy for Ouyang Shual to open his mouth, so Lin Jing naturally had no reason to refuse. At this moment, the price had already soared to 200,000 gold coins. The higher the price, the more cautious the players became. After all, for the majority of the players, the large space stone was not necessary. Especially in the war, where the use of storage bags was prohibited, it further weakened the use of the storage bag. For the average player, a large or even medium-sized space stone was enough. Had it not been for the time limit, which had triggered a frenzy of gold coins, it would have been impossible for him to even reach 200,000 gold coins. Of course, there were still many who were willing to bid. Seeing this, Ouyang Shua opened his mouth for the first time. 300,000 gold coins. In an instant, the entire auction site was stunned. It wasn't that the players were intimidated by Ouyang Shua's bid. Rather, this was the first time Ouyang Shua had ever made a bid. As the most dazzling existence in all the previous auctions, his every move was watched by everyone. Ouyang Shua's background was no longer a secret. A commoner player becoming the world's #1 lord had long since become an inspirational story on the forums, and he was worshipped by countless commoner players. Therefore, no one would say anything even if Ouyang Shua were to suffer a setback in this exchange. Shanghai City no longer needed to prove anything to the outside world. Its very existence was a powerful deterrent. It just so happened that Ouyang Shua still made a move. With regards to this, everyone chose to wait and see. Even Xing Zhichun, who loved to stir up trouble, and Lord Chunshan, who harbored enmity towards Ouyang Shua, did not appear to stir things up. This was the general trend. In the end, Ouyang Shua successfully won the bid for the giant space stone. The seventh auction item could be said to be uneventful. Perhaps because of this, the auctioneer's next move simply turned the scene into a frenzied sea. The eighth and ninth beauties came out together and unveiled the mysterious auction items. They were a set of armor and a pair of boots. Whether it was the armor or the boots, the surface was overflowing with light. Knowledgeable people knew that this was the unique light of a divine artifact. Auctioning 2 divine artifacts at once, perhaps only Gaia had such boldness. The entire scene sucked in a breath of cold air. The central street outside, without waiting for the auctioneer's introduction, had already completely boiled up. The players' eyes were filled with greed. Divine artifacts, the player's ultimate pursuit of equipment. Seeing this, the auctioneer smiled and introduced. The armor is called the Golden Beast Cloud Devouring Armor, and the boots are called the Flowing Cloud Moon Chasing Boots. These 2 pieces of godly equipment are the 2 main parts of the godly equipment set, War Blood. The base price is 120,000 gold coins, and there is no fixed price. Please bid. Hiss. Gaia's heroic spirit once again exceeded the players' expectations. It turned out to be a top-notch divine artifacts set. No wonder it was said to be auctioned as a package. If it was sold separately, the players would probably curse. As long as it was a set, in addition to the attributes of a single piece, there would be even more powerful set attribute. Collecting a set of divine artifacts could be said to be the ultimate pursuit of adventure-type players. Right now, there were 2 of them at once. Although the remaining parts, especially the core weapons, were probably extremely difficult to obtain, even so, it was enough to make the players crazy. All the big shots of the guilds could no longer remain calm. On the other hand, the ordinary players completely gave up and didn't even have the interest to bid. 500,000 gold coins. Swallow Li San, the leader of the 18 steeds of Swallow and Cloud, broke the silence and was the first to bid. As expected, the first bid made the ordinary players despair. This bid was destined to be a game between the big shot. The War Blood set was obviously only suitable for adventure-type players of the general profession. Swordsmen like One Sword from the West and Lin Jing were unwilling to wear such heavy armor. Swallow Li San was the most orthodox general, and he was also a knight general of the general branch. Naturally, he was very envious of the War Blood set. 600,000 gold coins. Dream Cloud, the leader of the One Dream Brothel, who was also a knight general, bid vaguely. Obviously, this auction was not entirely dominated by the top 10 guild. 700,000 gold coins. Another person entered the competition for the War Blood set. It was Moon illuminating the river. The Breeze Pavilion was mostly made up of strategists, but its leader, Moon illuminating the river, was a general. He could be said to be an anomaly. 800,000 gold coins. Every time the price was raised, it would be at least 100,000 gold coins. This scene was enough to make people go crazy. This time, the bidder was the #1 adventure-type player in the China region, the leader of the baleful mercenary group, the most powerful guild in China, Bloody Romance. Crimson Romance was also a general. 4 of the top generals in the China region entered the competition one by one. However, each of them had the support of a big guild. Even Bloody Romance didn't dare to say that he had 100% chance of winning. Now, it was up to who was willing to go all out. 900,000 gold coins. As expected, Swallow Li San, who was the first to bid, chose to follow with no intention of giving up. The smell of gunpowder was getting stronger and stronger. Everyone held their breath, waiting to witness a historic moment. Chapter 574. Under everyone's gazes, the stunning number finally jumped out. 1 million gold. The bidder was still Blood Romance. Seeing this, Moon Illuminates the river stiffened and took the initiative to back out. Apart from supporting the development of the guild, he also had to take care of Lingxi City, so he couldn't continue to gamble. 1,100,000 gold. Swallow Li San gritted his teeth and chose to keep up. In the end, it was still a showdown between Blood Romance and Swallow Li San. 1,200,000 gold. Blood Romance naturally had no reason to give up. 1,250,000 gold. Swallow Li San's eyes were filled with a trace of struggle. Anyone could see that this round of bidding was close to his limit. Now it was time to see if Blood Romance would continue bidding. 1,350,000 gold. As expected of the #1 player, Blood Romance raised the price by another 100,000 gold. Finally, Blood Romance said to Swallow Li San from afar, "Brother Yen, this is my last bid." Obviously, Blood Romance also didn't want to continue bidding indefinitely. 1,350,000 gold was already a sky-high price. Even Lin Jing couldn't afford it. Bloodlust Mercenary Group truly had a deep foundation. Swallow Li San sighed dejectedly when he saw this, and he unwillingly withdrew from this competition. In the blink of an eye, the auction came to an end. Finally, the mysterious veil of the finale was lifted. It was a talisman. Emperor Historical General Summoning Talisman. Once used, there is a 100% chance of summoning an Emperor Historical General. The starting price is 100,000 gold. There is no fixed price. Please bid. The auctioneer said. Summoning talismans were even rarer than substitute dolls. Not only was the Emperor Summoning Talisman auctioned out an Emperor Summoning Talisman, but it was also a Directional Summoning Talisman. After the baptism of War Blood, the players were much calmer towards the final item. The only ones who really wanted it were the lords. In other words, they were the territories that lacked a general who could take charge of an area on his own. Unfortunately, the lords that had the strength and money were all from Yan Huang Alliance. In Yan Huang Alliance, Di Chen had Lianpo, Lord Chunshen had Tiandan, and Xiongba had Wuqi. The Battle Wolves had Zhao Zhuang, so they weren't in a rush to recruit generals. As for Feng Qing, he had no intention of doing this. Thus, the one who truly desired this summoning amulet was Military Kill Ripper. Army Kill Ripper had just bought the Mongolian Iron Cavalier training manual, and he needed a general to lead this army. It was a pity that Military Kill Ripper was too unpopular within the Yan Huang Alliance, and no one gave way to him. Although Di Chen, Lord Chunshen and the others already had famed generals in their territories, they did not mind adding one more. After all, compared to Shanghai City, their lineup of generals was truly shabby. After a round of bidding, Military Kill Break won the bid for the talisman at the price of 650,000 gold coins. The entire auction had officially come to an end. The 10 items were sold for a total of 5,250,000 gold coins. This year's auction was destined to be recorded in the annals of history and become a legend of wealth. After the auction ended, the auctioneer announced a shocking piece of news. As the saying goes, nothing should happen more than 3 times. This year's auction would be the last one held by the system in China. In the years to come, players would no longer be able to buy treasures like the ones displayed in the capital's auction. When everyone heard this, they all sighed deeply. Only Ouyang Shuo remained calm. As someone who had been reborn, Ouyang Shuo had already expected this. He also knew that in the 4th year of Gaia, although there would not be an auction in the capital, Gaia would organize a global auction to share this feast. At that time, players from all over the world would compete for the 10 treasures. Just thinking about it made one's blood boil. After setting a date for the Shanghai Alliance conference with Bai Hua and the others, Ouyang Shuo left the auction house. Of course, he did not leave the capital. Now that he was in the capital, Ouyang Shuo naturally had to talk to his 2 allies, Shadow Fox and Dream Cloud. The location of the meeting was the Shanghai City office in the capital. The 3 of them discussed for an entire afternoon before going their separate ways. That night, Ouyang Shuo left the capital and returned to Shanghai City. The next day, after half a month of discussion and deliberation, the Southern Border Protectorate's new restructuring plan was officially announced. It signified that the governance system of the territory had been upgraded. The entire plan involved 3 major adjustments. First, it would be upgraded to 4 major bureaus. The Administrative Bureau, the Interior Bureau, the Finance Bureau, and the Military Bureau would all be upgraded to general bureaus. There was a practical reason behind the name change. First, the Interior Bureau would have the Science, Education, and Health Bureau, and the Military Bureau would have the War Readiness Bureau. It was inevitable that there would be some confusion in the names, so it was not easy to clearly define the relationship between the 2. After being upgraded to general bureaus, there would be no such trouble. Second, the structure of the 3 levels of government offices, except for the Military Bureau, was basically based on the structure of the Southern Border Protectorate. Thus, it was impossible to clearly define and maintain the absolute authority of the 4 bureaus of the Southern Border Protectorate. After the upgrade, the 4 general bureaus of the Southern Border Protectorate would become a unique existence. The 4 bureaus were upgraded and their names changed, but the official position of the chief officer remained the same. He was still called the chief officer. Ouyang Shuo had thought of calling him a minister. Unfortunately, although the Southern Border Protectorate had the authority to establish its own headquarters, it could not appoint ministers. In private, Xiao He and the others had already crossed the line by calling themselves ministers. In an official position, Ouyang Shuo naturally did not dare to step over the line and give others a chance to speak. Only after the country was established could it be truly established. Second, it was to expand the 4 bureaus. After the destruction of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, the territory would have 7 counties. The Southern Border Protectorate's previous structure of 4 bureaus and 17 departments was no longer enough to maintain the governance of the territory. Take the Office of Examination under the Administrative Bureau as an example. According to Ouyang Shuo's original plan, the Office of Examination was the core department responsible for governing the territory. In reality, the Office of Examination was only responsible for assessing the performance of the territory's officials. It was far from the true governance of the territory. Ouyang Shuo's previous reorganization of the territory's governance had forced him to send out a higher-ranked administrative bureau chief. This was how it was. If the Office of Examination was expanded, there would be no need to worry. The same situation was happening in the Education, and Health Bureau. Ouyang Shuo wanted to reform the basic public services of the territory, and the Office of Examination could not handle it. He could only temporarily upgrade the Office of Examination. There were many similar administrative problems. Thus, the expansion of the 4 bureaus was imperative. Chapter 575. The expansion of the 4 directorates was, in fact, a subdivision of the authority of the various departments under the Directorate General. This was to satisfy the increasingly arduous, complex, and difficult problems of the territory's government affairs. When conditions permit, the various divisions will be upgraded to directorates. Other than the Science, Education, Civil, and Defense Department and the War Preparedness Department that had already been upgraded, 3 more departments were going to be upgraded. The first was to upgrade the Merit Examination Department under the Administrative Department to the Administrative Department of Personnel. The administration of appointments was similar to the Ministry of Appointments of the 6 ministries in ancient times. It consisted of the Ministry of Appointments, the Seal Department, the Meritorious Department, and the Examination Department. They were in charge of the appointment, dismissal, examination, promotion, conferment, and transfer of civil officials in the territory. Ouyang Shua chose Zhang Tingyu as the first chief of the Administrative Bureau. The memorial system that Zhang Tingyu was previously in charge of had been completed and officially put into operation. After a small test, this number 1 Han official of the Qing dynasty would be able to display his outstanding talents in an even more important post. In addition to serving as the director of the administration of personnel, Zhang Tingyu will also serve as the deputy director of the administration of administration, which means that he will also have a certain say in other government affairs of the administration of administration. Even Su Zhe, the head of the Department of Science and Education, did not receive such an honor. Zhang Tingyu became the second most powerful person in the administrative department, second only to Xiao He. This showed how highly Ouyang Shua regarded Zhang Tingyu. The former head of the Merit Examination Department, Qin Shijian, would continue to serve as the head of the Merit Examination Department of the Administration of Personnel. Although Qin Shijian's performance in the examination office wasn't too eye-catching, he was still diligent and conscientious. In particular, he had assisted the 2 chief administrative officers to reorganize the governance of the territory. His methods were also very tough. As a result, Qin Shijian had accumulated a wealth of experience in the evaluation of civil officials. By placing Qin Shijian in the examination hall, it showed that Ouyang Shua approved of him. The second was to upgrade the Supervisory Department under the Internal Affairs Administration to the Supervisory Department. The authority of the Inspectorate was similar to that of the Imperial Censorate or the Imperial Censorate in ancient times. It was in charge of supervising, impeaching, and making suggestions. At the same time, he was given the right to hear major cases. It was obvious that the newly upgraded Inspectorate Bureau had more power and responsibilities than before. The future Internal Affairs Bureau would combine the ancient Imperial Censorate, the Ministry of Justice, and the Supreme Court into one. The director of the Internal Affairs Department was the Minister of Justice of the territory. The former Director General of the Monitoring Department, Jing Jian, would continue to be in charge of the Monitoring Bureau. As an official, Jing Jian was impartial and incorruptible. Moreover, he dared to speak his mind and was the best candidate for the position of imperial censor. He had the decisiveness of a martial artist and the wisdom of a civil official. He could be said to be an all-rounder. Only in this way could he be in charge of a vital organization like the Inspectorate. As for his personal relationship with the director of the Internal Affairs Department, Wei Yang, Ouyang Shua believed that it would not affect Director Jing's rational judgment on government affairs and that he would only listen to Wei Yang. The third was to upgrade the Industry Department under the General Administration of Finance to the Industry and Development Planning Department. Ouyang Shua had previously revealed to Ingyu that he was going to raise the status of the Industrial Division. This adjustment was to fulfill his previous promise. The Industry and Development Planning Department was responsible for industrial planning, investment, and regulation in the territory. It was a modern organization different from the ancient government offices, and it was also the core organization in charge of the territory's industries. The industrialization strategy of the territory would be led and implemented by the Industrial and Development Planning Department. The Protectorate's industrial-related functions would all be merged into this bureau to avoid overlapping powers. Without a doubt, Yu would continue to be in charge of this department. The three bureaus that had just been upgraded were the core organizations of the four directorate. After adjusting these three second-level bureaus, the administrative efficiency of the Protectorate of Southern Border would at least double. As for the other bureaus, Ouyang Shua did not adjust them in one go. The main problem was the lack of independent civil officials. In the future, Ouyang Shua would upgrade the various bureaus according to the needs. The third was the appointment and dismissal of related personnel. This restructuring of the organization involved more than 100 civil officials. The main basis was the recently concluded inspection of the civil officials of the territory. In the Protectorate, some incompetent civil officials would be sent to the local counties to gain experience. Similarly, some outstanding civil officials would be transferred to the central government of the territory. This would also help the central government and the local civil officials to communicate in an orderly manner. The reason for the delay in announcing this adjustment was to complete the relevant personnel arrangements. At this point, the adjustment of the entire organization came to an end. Only after completing the adjustment of the organization would Ouyang Shua have the confidence to solidify the territory's foundation in the first half of the third year of Gaia. While Shanghai City was busy adjusting the structure of the territory, the China region was not peaceful. The most lively region was the Central Plains. Just as Ouyang Shua expected, Lord Chunshan was unwilling to accept defeat. He wanted to give it his all before winter arrived. He wanted to uproot Zhang Chu's regime, which was still in a stalemate. On the day the auction ended, Lord Chunshan spent another 1,000,000 gold coins to recruit soldiers in the various great cities. In total, he hired more than 100,000 adventure-type mercenaries. His intentions were self-evident. Soon, winter was approaching in the north. The war in the Central Plains was in a stalemate. Gaia's limited-time exchange had become Lord Chunshan's last straw. Lord Chunshan wanted to fight with his back to the wall. Before winter truly arrived, he would strike a shocking blow against Zhang Chu. Gaia's third year, 5th day of the first month, Central Plains Province. Lord Chunshan's top general, Tian Dan, led a coalition army of 150,000 mercenaries. In addition to the scattering beans commander's seal that Lord Chunshan had just won, a total of 300,000 soldiers suddenly launched a fierce attack on Zhang Chu's southern army. This time, Zhang Chu was caught off guard. Originally, they had already made preparations for a winter break. Who would have thought that at this time, the enemy would launch a fierce attack and increase the number of soldiers by 150,000. In just one day, the southern army's position was broken through by the allied army. The army was routed and fled. Seeing this, Tian Dan led his troops to pursue and attack. The vanguard of his troops headed straight for Zhang Chu's capital, Chun County. In an instant, the capital was in a state of emergency. In a panic, Chun Xing had no choice but to transfer the troops stationed in the north back to Chun County. Emperor Chen's troops stationed at Zhang Chu's northern border saw this and brazenly attacked. Taking advantage of the situation, they officially declared war on Zhang Chu. 100,000-strong army in the north of Zhang Chu set off waves of smoke. At the same time, the Wandering Illusion Division in the west also changed from a passive defense to an active attack. The three great armies clearly had a tacit understanding. This operation was the result of the internal coordination of the Yen-Huang alliance. In the face of success and failure, they finally put aside their differences and began to work together. As a result, Zhang Chu's regime was attacked on three sides. It was in dire straits. It looked like the last rebel army group was going to be completely annihilated in this winter. Chapter 576. It's snowing. Ouyang Shua stood under the eaves and looked into the distance. Lianzhou Basin was as warm as spring all year round, but snowflakes were falling from the sky, which was rare. The fluttering snowflakes decorated Shanghai City, making it look even more enchanting and enchanting. To the people of Lianzhou, who had never seen snow since they were born, this snow was undoubtedly the best gift from God. It was the warmest New Year's gift in this winter. The whole city fell into a fanaticism for snow. The streets and alleys were filled with children having snowball fights. Even the adults could not help but join in the fun. At the corners there were lifelike snowmen, which decorated Shanghai City in a unique way. Not only Lianzhou Basin, but the entire China region was covered in snow. The harsh climate of the wilderness, which had been condensed during the winter, finally reached its peak at this moment. The red clouds that had been drifting without dispersing had magically dispersed overnight, turning into a heavy snowfall. The gorgeous red had turned into a clean white. The heavy snowfall spread from the south to the north, getting heavier and thicker. In the second year of Gaia, the bloodstains, broken limbs, and wreckage that had been left behind in the wilderness for an entire year were all covered by this sudden snowfall, no longer existing in the world. As far as the eye could see, there was only endless whiteness left between heaven and earth. The vast expanse of whiteness covered all the ugliness of the world. The world seemed to have returned to peace and prosperity. The entire wilderness stopped fighting at the same time, welcoming the arrival of the Lunar New Year. Even the Central Plains, which had just been stirred up, regained its rare tranquility. The cold winter, the irresistible cold, had officially arrived in the north. Under the joint attack of Lord Chunshan, Di Chen, and Wandering Huan, Chen Sheng's Zhang Chu finally could not hold on and was beaten back. The defeat of the southern army triggered the collapse of Zhang Chu's front line. As the saying goes, pull one hair and the whole body moves. In just 1 week, Zhang Chu's territory had been lost. In the later stages of the war, even the Phoenix Division, which had been observing from the sidelines, could not help but lead their troops to attack the weakened Zhang Chu. No one had expected that a new regime in the wilderness would be so vulnerable. If not for Xiang Yu, the hegemon king of Western Chu, personally leading his troops to Chun County at the last moment, Chun County would not have survived. It was likely that Chun Shing would not even be able to protect his capital city. It would be destroyed along with his empire. It was reported that Chun Shing fell ill as soon as the battle ended. In this cold winter, Zhang Chu was struggling at death's door. In the end, the 4 rebel army groups were unable to escape this calamity and fell under the blade of the overlord players. On the other hand, Ouyang Shua's eyes narrowed when he heard the news. Xiang Yu's purpose of leading his troops to aid Chun County was not simple. In the 3rd year of Gaia, how would the hegemon of Western Chu amaze the world? Before the first wave subsided, another wave would rise. Ouyang Shua already had a premonition that a new king would soon stand tall in the Central Plains. The losers of this great war in the Central Plains were certainly miserable, but the victors were not too happy either. As soon as the battle ended, the 4 armies that had been working together were on guard against each other. Everything was for profit. After taking down the Central Plains province, how to divide this tempting cake was a matter of great knowledge. Logically speaking, Lord Chunshan had spent nearly 2 million in this war and should have been the biggest winner. Unfortunately, Lord Chunshan's Danyang city was too far away from the Central Plains province. It was beyond his reach. Moreover, whether it was Lord Chunshan's 100,000 mercenaries or the 50,000 elite soldiers summoned by scattering beans to form army talismans, they were all a thing of the past. Lord Chunshan's troops did not have the advantage in terms of military strength after the war. Instead, the Phoenix Division, which had been biding its time, became the strongest. If not for Di Chen and the others' resistance, Feng Chihuang would have become the biggest fisherman. After all, fallen Phoenix City was not far from the Central Plains province. In this cold winter, The four powers were destined to engage in a game and negotiation that was even more complicated and difficult than a war. Population, resources, territory, surrendered soldiers, and everything else became the focus of the four powers. In particular, population had become the focus of contention. Whether it was Lord Chunchen, Di Chen, or even Piao Linghuan, their territories were too far away from the Central Plains province. It was not possible for them to manage such an uncivilized land for a long time. The only way was to completely evacuate the population of the Central Plains province. Population was forever the most precious resource in the wilderness, because they represented an unending stream of production power. Previously, after Zhan Lang and Xiong Ba had joined forces to exterminate Huang Chao's army, they had adopted a similar three lights policy in Huanan province. Population, resources, and surrendered soldiers were all swept clean. The huge Huanan province had become a vacuum zone after this campaign. 9 out of 10 houses were empty. The Allied armies had just retreated, and the province was immediately filled with bandits. It returned to the original state of the wilderness. Everything was back to square one. Unfortunately, the snow had sealed off the mountains and the roads were difficult. Lord Chunchen and the others could only temporarily stop their operations and wait for the coming year. The lords of the Central Plains would not be able to enjoy this new year in peace. No one knew what kind of changes would happen this winter. Lord Chunchen must be feeling the most conflicted and unbearable at this time. He would never have thought that this snow would come so suddenly and fiercely. In just one night it had changed the color of heaven and earth, and put on new clothes. After paying 2 million gold coins, Lord Chunchen would definitely think of a way to recoup his costs and even generate profit. In the end, Lord Chunchen was still a businessman. What a businessman pursued was always profit. Before the operation, the elites of Lord Chunchen's family had already carefully calculated. Even without Gaia's year-end bonus, if everything went smoothly, this battle would still be profitable. It was just that a sudden heavy snowfall had disrupted their plans. Because of this, Ouyang Shua had no choice but to postpone the conference of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas, to give Feng Chihuang enough energy to deal with the aftermath of the war in the Central Plains. Originally, Ouyang Shua's plan was to choose the location of this year's conference at Fallen Phoenix City. Unfortunately, this snow made the members not want to go to the north to spend the winter. Even Feng Chihuang wanted to escape from this damned winter. Everyone discussed and discussed. In the end, they actually chose Cliff Mountain City as the location of the conference. In the entire China region, at this time, only Cliff Mountain City had a pleasant climate. In reality, it was a holiday destination for the Spring Festival. How could it be an undeserved reputation? To be able to have a sunny beach party in this cold winter was undoubtedly extremely satisfying for the members of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas. Chapter 577. P.S. Holiday is over, 3,000 words per chapter will be restored. Everyone thought that the snow would bring complete peace to the wilderness. At least before the new year, there would be peace. Who would have thought that this tranquility would soon be broken again? No one expected that the 15th city in the China region would be promoted before the new year. The promoted city was a dark horse. Its lord was, overturning heaven and earth, which was ranked 8th in Gaia's year-end bonus. Overturning heaven and earth was rewarded with 20,000 achievement points and promoted to a rank 3 marquee. After half a month of hard work, the promotion mission was finally completed and the territory was promoted to a rank 1 city. As a result, the 5th battle was successfully initiated. On the 15th of January in the 3rd year of Gaia, a system announcement resounded throughout the China region. System announcement. China region has successfully promoted 15 cities, triggering the battle system. The 5th battle, Battle of Mabe, will officially begin in 3 days. Please look forward to it. Friendly reminder: the Battle of Mabe is a non-mandatory battle scenario mission. Only the top 50 territories are eligible to participate. The Battle of Mabe was finally here. In the 4th year of Yuanshou, Emperor Wu of Han mobilized 140,000 cavalrymen, 140,000 warhorses, and 100,000 foot soldiers and porters under the command of Wei Qing and Hua Tsubing. They set off towards the Mabe Desert from the east and west. When the Xiongnu Chanyu heard the news, he moved his supplies and deployed his elite troops to the northern border of the desert to meet the Han army. After Wei Qing left the fortress, he learned that the Chanyu did not head east. He led his elite troops and ordered Li Guang and Zhao Shiqi to take the eastern route to provide support. Wei Qing led his troops for over 1,000 miles, passing through the desert and engaging the Chanyu's troops in battle. First, he used Wu Gang chariots to form a camp and stabilize the troops before sending out 5,000 cavalry. At dusk, a strong wind blew and sand and stones blew. Wei Qing took the opportunity to surround the Chanyu from both sides. The Chanyu saw that the Han army was large and strong. Knowing that it would be difficult for him to win, he led a few hundred elite cavalry and escaped northwest. The Xiongnu army was routed. Wei Qing sent light cavalry to pursue while he led his main force to follow. At Mountain Yan's Zhao Xian city, they killed 19,000 enemies and burned their grain to return home. Li Guang and Zhao Shiqi lost their way and could not meet up with Wei Qing in Mabe. Wei Qing ordered the chief scribe to summon Li Guang to the shogunate and interrogated him about his loss of Dao. Li Guang committed suicide out of humiliation. After Hua Tsubing led his troops out of the fortress, he brought along a small amount of supplies and rations. He commanded the captured Xiongnu people to be the vanguard and open a path for the Han army. They crossed the desert, crossed the river, and captured the chief minister Zhang Chu alive. They killed the king of the north chariots and turned around to attack the left general Shuang and seized the enemy's flag and war drums. They also crossed Mount Nanhou, crossed the Gonglu River, and captured the Tung Tu Wang, the Prince of Han, and 83 other people, including the general, the prime minister, the Donghu, and the commandant. In this expedition, Hua Tsubing's troops suffered a loss of 10,000 men, but they managed to kill a total of 70,443 barbarians. At this point, the left and right virtuous princes of the Xiongnu had been completely cut off, leaving the Chanyu alone in the north. Hua Tsubing sealed the Wolf Story Mountain, gave Zen to Gaian, and returned to the Immensity Sea. After this battle, the Xiongnu fled far away, and there was no royal court in Nan. After this battle, the three famous generals would face different fate. Great General Wei Qing's merits and demerits offset each other, so he was not rewarded. Old General Li Guang committed suicide out of humiliation. When the people heard this, they wept, regardless of whether they knew or did not. Cavalry General Hua Tsubing was rewarded wantonly, and he was in the limelight for a while. 2 years later, he suddenly died at the age of 24, and people could not help but sigh. There was no doubt that these three famous generals, especially Wei Qing and Hua Tsubing, would be the target of the Lord's Domain players' frenzied pursuit. Even Ouyang Shual was no exception. It must be known that Wei Qing and Hua Tsubing were both part of the 10 great generals of China in ancient times. They were on the same level as Bai Qi Han Xian and the others. Just as Ouyang Shual was sorting out the information about the Battle of Mabe, he suddenly heard the sound of a system notification. System notification. Congratulations to player not saying that has no clothes, you have met the requirements to participate in the Battle of Mabe. In this battle, regardless of the rank, every feudal lord can only lead 3,000 troops at most. Please be prepared in advance. Ouyang Shuo frowned when he heard this. With his current rank of a marquis, according to the rules of the battle, he could lead 50,000 troops. 3,000 was only the upper limit for a marquis of the first class. Comparing the two, the difference was 16 to 17 times. It was like heaven and earth. Gaia had always pursued the principle of fairness. They would not arbitrarily change the rules of the battle just because of Ouyang Shuo. It could only be said that this battle would be very different from the previous battles. The rank of nobility had always been the most important and core indicator that Gaia gave to the feudal lords. Ouyang Shuo did not believe that his rank of a first-class marquis would receive the same treatment as a first-class earl. If that was the case, what was the point of the feudal lords painstakingly earning merit points? As for what the compensation was, he would probably only know after entering the battle map. In addition to the number of troops, Gaia also set a strict limit on the number of feudal lords participating in the battle. There were estimated to be around 500 territories in the China region. Apart from some remote and desolate areas, most of them were promoted to third-class counties. If all of them participated in the battle, even if a feudal lord led 3,000 troops, it would be as high as 1.5 million. This time, Gaia eliminated more than 90% of the contestants in one go. With the development of the territories, it was extremely difficult to level up a county city. The difference between the levels of the territories was no longer as obvious as it was in Gaia. However, this did not mean that there was no difference between the development of the various territories. In the China region's territory ranking, when the territories were of the same level, the 4 territorial indexes that determined the territory's ranking were politics, economy, culture, and military. The higher the overall value of the 4 indexes, the higher the ranking. Before this, the feudal lords' competition for the territory ranking was only a fight for face. The higher the ranking, the more face they had. From now on, the competition for the territory ranking would involve real benefit. After all, whether or not one could participate in a battle would have a huge impact on the territory. In the worst-case scenario, it would be a missed opportunity to be promoted to a county city. In the future, the feudal lords would have to put more effort into the territory's 4 indexes under the premise that they focused on raising the territory's level. After all, these 4 indexes basically covered all aspects of the territory. There could not be any shortcomings in domestic and foreign affairs. In order to temper the young feudal lords, Gaia had put in a lot of effort. In this way, even if the top 50 territories in the China region all participated in the battle, the total number of the mutant army would not be more than 150,000. The mutant army would not be able to have a decisive impact on the Battle of Maobei. Because the number of troops they brought was the same, the feudal lords were on the same starting line, which was rare. The advantage that Shanghai City had always had in terms of military strength was gone. This battle is not going to be easy. Ouyang Shuo let out a long sigh. More importantly, how would the feudal lords choose their side in this battle? Would there still be players who would choose the Han Nu side that was destined to lose? Even if they wanted to take a gamble and reverse the situation, they would not be able to overcome the obstacle of national sentiment. Help the Han Nu fight the Han army? Just the thought of it was a pain in the ass. Needless to say, the Han Nu side did not have any generals that were worth subduing. The Western Han side, on the other hand, had 3 famous generals, as well as a large number of deputy generals and field generals. How to choose sides was a very simple problem. In this way, would Gaia not be afraid that the difference in the mutant army between the 2 camps would be too great? What kind of setting did Gaia have in mind? Everything was unknown. Even Ouyang Shuo, who had been reborn, did not know much about this. In his previous life, the information about this battle was very limited on the forum. Otherwise, Ouyang Shuo would have made preparations long ago. The only thing he could do was to order the Combat Readiness Division to make some targeted preparations based on the characteristics of the desert. For example, he stepped up the production of a large number of military ration pills. Marching in the desert was the most difficult thing to resupply. Otherwise, Emperor Wu of Han would not have conscripted more than 100,000 infantry soldiers to be responsible for the supply of cavalry. Now, Gaia had stipulated that each feudal lord could only bring a maximum of 3,000 soldiers. In this way, many of Ouyang Shua's arrangements had been wasted, and they were completely useless. It's really a bad start. Ouyang Shua could only bring 3,000 soldiers. He did not even need to think about it. He could just bring 3,000 divine guards to battle. Since he could not have an advantage in terms of the number of troops, Ouyang Shua could only plan to have an advantage in terms of the individual combat strength of the soldiers. This advantage was destined not to be too big. Which of the territories that were still struggling to survive in the wilderness did not have 3,000 elite cavalrymen? Although there was a gap between elite cavalry and the divine guards, the gap was not huge. As for the generals that followed the army, Ouyang Shua did not plan to recruit Bai Qi, Han Xian, and the other generals. It was not that he could not make it in time. After the system update, the feudal lord's troops no longer needed to go through specific teleportation formations to participate in the battle. As long as Ouyang Shua submitted the list to the system, no matter where the troops were, they could be teleported to the battle map. Gaia had set this up in consideration that with the expansion of the player's territory, it would be impossible for the feudal lord to gather all the troops to participate in the battle in just 3 days. For example, if Ouyang Shua could bring 50,000 soldiers this time, he would definitely mobilize 3 major armies. The time it took to march on the road was not enough. In this regard, Gaia was very humane. It was flexible and did not rigidly adhere to the rules. Ouyang Shua did not recruit Bai Qi and the others because he really did not want to make a big fuss. A mere 3,000 divine guardsmen was not enough for Bai Qi and the other divine generals. Even if the alliance army of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas was included, the total was less than 20,000 soldiers. Sending Bai Qi and the others was a waste of their talent. Instead of that, it was better to leave them in the wilderness and continue to reorganize the army. The 3,000 divine guards would be personally led by Ouyang Shua. By now, Ouyang Shua could also be considered a fierce general. In addition, Ouyang Shua also planned to recruit a staff officer to accompany the army. The person he chose was Zhao Kuo, the deputy director of the General Administration of Military Affairs and the chief of the War Department. Chapter 578. Ouyang Shua didn't gather the members of the alliance for a meeting. It was already the 5th battle. Everyone knew what to do, so there was no need for them to give instructions. Moreover, the territory had developed to this point, and no one was an ignorant person. There was no need for Ouyang Shua to give them advice one by one. It wouldn't be good to say too much. That was how people were. As their status increased, their mentality would naturally change. Not to mention Feng Qiuhuang and White Birch, even if Siege Lion and the others were placed in the outside world, no matter how disappointing they would still be famous feudal lords. They were existences that most players had to look up to. Because of this, Ouyang Shua was very careful and knew when to stop. He took the time to go to Cliff Mountain City to pick up Little White. It wasn't appropriate to call it Little White. Ever since Cliff Mountain City was established, the 3 of them had been cultivating in the Spirit Beast Pavilion and had already reached the initial stage. Other than Shui, who was a special case, Little Blue and Little White were already close to adulthood. Little Blue's size was almost the same as its parents, making people feel intimidated at first sight. When it wasn't cultivating in the Spirit Beast Pavilion, Little Blue would often swim in the sea outside the city. The players who were active in Cliff Mountain City all knew that this was a different Nian. Many players saw Little Blue as the guardian beast of Cliff Mountain City. In fact, that was the case. The nearby sea was much quieter because of Little Blue's existence. The evil beasts in the sea rarely dared to get close to Jingzhou Island. Otherwise, if he wasn't careful, he would become Little Green's food. Little White's body also grew bigger by the day. Today, he was no longer the little wolf cub from before. Instead, he was an exceptionally mighty and handsome white wolf. However, its gaze didn't change. It was still lazy and didn't look energetic at all. As for Snow, she was much more mysterious. He had been cultivating for so long, but he didn't look any different from the outside. She was still so innocent and unaffected. Ouyang Shua couldn't even check her attribute. Cultivation in the Spirit Beast Pavilion was undoubtedly very boring. The three of them were very close to Ouyang Shua. Especially Snow, who stuck close to Ouyang Shua. If it wasn't for Bing visiting them often, they probably wouldn't have lasted until now. Ouyang Shua took Little White away. Even Little Qing, who usually ignored him, was reluctant to leave. Ouyang Shua had a hunch that Little White, as the wolf god, might be of some help in the Battle of Mabe. That was why he brought Little White along. The other two children were naturally unable to follow along. However, he could consider bringing Little Qing along for the upcoming voyage. The next 2 days were extremely ordinary. All the preparations for the battle were in order. To the current Combat Readiness Division, it was extremely easy to prepare the logistics resources for 3,000 people. Every Divine Martial Guard was armed to the extreme. Radiant armor, Tang sword, lance, divine crossbow, etc. These were all standard equipment. He was armed to the teeth. This was especially so for the divine armed crossbow, which had been specially modified by the Combat Readiness Division. Even during high-speed movements like charging, as long as one trained well, one could still shoot 3 arrows consecutively. It was truly a killing machine. In addition, some divine martial guards with excellent archery skills were also equipped with longbows. Some of the barbarian mountain barbarian soldiers were equipped with one-handed shields according to their specialties. Every divine guard's equipment was custom-made. The value of a full set of equipment was no less than a few hundred gold coins. Every divine martial guard's luggage was filled with military rations pills. It was enough to last them and their horses for more than a month. After entering deep into the desert, even if the Han army wanted to provide logistics, they would not be able to. Therefore, they had to bring enough military rations pills. Ouyang Shua believed that the other feudal lords must have made the same arrangements. The difference was that Shanghai City's military research was at the forefront of China. It was reported that the Combat Readiness Division was already developing a super military rations pill. Just one small pill was enough to support a cavalryman and his mount for a day. He had brought enough tents for the army. The new generation of military tents was only the size of a backpack after it was completely folded. As for carrying heavy loads, it was basically not a burden to the elite green beetle horses of the Divine Martial Guards. It was difficult for an army to spend the night in the desert without tent. Apart from that, the Combat Readiness Division also made some modifications to the Divine Martial Guard's cloak. They added a specially made hood on top of the cloak. After wearing it, it could reduce the impact of sandstorms to a considerable extent. Ouyang Shua originally planned to ask the Combat Readiness Division to develop a type of protective goggles. Unfortunately, Shanghai City did not have the technology to make glass, so they could only give up. Apart from that, the Divine Martial Guard's boots, backpacks, daggers, belts, and even the shirts inside were all the latest new generation of special combat equipment developed by the Combat Readiness Division. They had already started developing this equipment when they were building the special combat base. Now it had basically taken shape. The current Divine Martial Guards truly had the framework of an ancient special combat force. Of course, there were also problems that the Combat Readiness Division could not solve. For example, drinking water. For an army in the desert, drinking water was as important as rations. It could even be said that it was the most important thing. Unfortunately, there was no such thing as compressed water in this world. Just relying on the water in the water pouch was definitely not enough. This could only be solved by the Divine Martial Guards themselves. When Ouyang Shua bought the super space at the auction, he expanded the storage pouch to 10,000 cubic meters, which was enough to store enough drinking water. Unfortunately, the storage pouch could not be used even on the battlefield. On the 18th of January in the third year of Gaia, at 9 in the morning, the system announcement rang. System announcement. In the spring of 119 BC, after the battle between the south of the desert and the west of the river, the Xiongnu Chanyu led his troops to the north of the desert. However, they continued to attack the northern prefectures of the Han dynasty, attempting to lure the Han army to cross the desert. Emperor Wu of Han sent General Wei Qing and Cavalry General Hua Tsubing to lead 50,000 cavalrymen and tens of thousands of infantrymen into North Desert in an attempt to wipe out the main force of the Xiongnu. He also organized hundreds of thousands of infantrymen and tens of thousands of horses to support the battle. This battle was the culmination of Emperor Wu's strategic attack on the Xiongnu. It was also the decisive battle between the Xiongnu Chanyu and the Western Han dynasty, which ended in a complete victory for the Han army. The fifth epic battle, the Battle of North Desert, has officially begun. In the square of Shanghai City, the 3,000 divine martial guards were in formation and ready to go. They checked the conditions to participate in the battle and confirmed the number of participants. Ouyang Shuo was about to choose his faction when he heard the system notification. System notification. In the Battle of North Desert, the mutant army will be the Western Han Dynasty's faction by default. No need to choose. Default faction? Interesting, Ouyang Shuo mumbled to himself. Before he could finish, another system notification sounded. System notification. The Western Han Dynasty's faction is divided into Wei Qing's faction and Hua Tsubing's faction. Please make your choice. What does this mean? The battle hasn't even started and we're already choosing sides? Ouyang Shuo frowned. He felt that this battle was full of mysteries. Historically, the Battle of North Desert had indeed been divided into two factions. Wei Qing led his troops and set off from Dingxiang. Hua Tsubing led his troops and set off from Dai County. The distance between the two cities was more than 100 miles. If that was the case, they really had to choose sides in advance so that they could immediately join the battle. What's the difference? Ouyang Shuo was still worried. The route chosen will involve different missions to subdue different generals, Gaia revealed. What do you mean? Ouyang Shuo asked. The feudal lord who chooses the Eastern Front will be the first to arrive at Wolf Story Mountain and will be able to subdue Hua Tsubing. The feudal lord who chooses the Western Front will be given two routes. Which two routes? Ouyang Shuo's heart twitched when he heard that he could directly subdue Hua Tsubing. Gaia was really going all out this time. The central army that follows Great General Wei Qing will be able to subdue Wei Qing as long as they kill Chanyu. The Eastern army that follows Li Guang and Zhao Shiqi will be able to subdue Li Guang as long as they successfully find them and bring them back to the right path. This will prevent Li Guang from committing suicide out of shame because he got lost. Gaia was not ambiguous. Ouyang Shuo was speechless when he heard this. This time, Gaia was going to put the three famous generals on the table for the feudal lords to fight over. It sounded like the opportunity to subdue a famous general was within reach. The more this was so, the more uneasy Ouyang Shuo felt. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. How could it be possible to subdue a divine general without paying a certain price? More importantly, even if they had to pay a heavy price, Yu Sha would probably return victorious in the end. There were only 3 famous generals, but there were 50 feudal lords participating in the battle. This was only one of the challenges. The bigger challenge was still the mission itself. None of the missions sounded easy to complete. The first to arrive at Wolf Story Mountain? That was a feat that had only been accomplished by the genius general, Hua Tsubing. Could a feudal lord with just 3,000 cavalrymen achieve this? Kill Chanyu? Even great General Wei Qing could not do this. As for finding Li Guang, it was purely luck. Even Li Guang, who had fought against the Xiongnu for his entire life, could get lost in the desert. It was the first time that they had encountered an army of mutants in the desert. To find the right path required a lot of luck. Hence, no matter which mission it was, it seemed like an impossible one. This was equivalent to Gaia giving 50 feudal lords a sweet fantasy. What was worse was that Gaia had suddenly done this before they set off. This way, no matter if it was the alliance of mountains and seas, or the Yen-Huang alliance, they would not be able to work together. Everyone's choice was random. Unfortunately, this bait was too tempting. Even Ouyang Shuo, who knew that this was a trap, had no choice but to close his eyes and jump in. The key now was which route to take. Chapter 579. Ouyang Shuo had to choose between Wei Qing, Hua Tsubing, and Li Guang. The first to be ruled out was the veteran General Li Guang. Ouyang Shuo was confident that he could find the flying General Li Guang in the desert because he had the descendant of the wolf deity, Little White. However, Ouyang Shuo was unwilling to give up on Wei Qing and Hua Tsubing. To the current Shanghai city, an additional general like Li Guang would not bring about any major changes. On the contrary, if they had an additional divine general, it would be enough to support the Fourth Army. The choice couldn't be any clearer. Between Wei Qing and Hua Tsubing, Ouyang Shuo found it difficult to choose. Wei Qing and Hua Tsubing were the twin pillars of the Han Empire. Both of them were famous generals of their generation. Even their best tactics were to infiltrate deep into enemy territory, win by surprise, launch long-range attacks, and encircle the enemy. Wei Qing was the pioneer of this tactic, while Hua Tsubing carried it forward. Of course, there was a huge difference between the two of them. Wei Qing was good at controlling the overall situation. He did not focus on how many people he killed. Instead, he focused on achieving his strategic goals. He focused on dealing a heavy blow to the enemy's economy, obtaining the enemy's resources, and using the war to sustain the war, causing the enemy to lose the foundation for survival. It could be said that Wei Qing was a commander with a clear strategy. He was humble and courteous, not arrogant, and loved his soldiers. He was a rare good general since ancient times. Hua Tsubing was different. He was a genius vanguard. He was flexible in battle, and did not stick to one style. In war, Hua Tsubing did not want the enemy's resources. He focused on killing the enemy's leaders and strength. He took military supplies from the enemy and did not wait for supplies from the rear. In this way, he could maximize the mobility and flexibility of his troops, ensure that they could capture more enemy leaders, kill more enemies, and fully utilize the advantages of cavalry. The two of them were evenly matched and each had their own merit. Therefore, both of them were very suitable for Shanghai City. What Ouyang Shuo considered was the difference in the mission between the two of them. Wei Qing's mission was to kill the Xiongnu Chanyu. To be honest, this mission was very fortuitous. Furthermore, with Ouyang Shuo's 3,000 troops, it was impossible for him to gain an overwhelming advantage in terms of military strength. It was truly difficult to subdue Wei Qing. On the contrary, Hua Tsubing's mission was to be the first to arrive at Wolf Story Mountain. Although the journey would definitely be difficult and dangerous, with Whitey around, Ouyang Shuo's confidence was still greater than that of the other overlords. Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, Ouyang Shuo finally chose Hua Tsubing. Choose Hua Tsubing's route, Ouyang Shuo said. System notification. Route selection complete. Congratulations to player not wearing for activating war teleportation. The teleportation limit is 3,000 people. Teleportation begins. After a brief moment of dizziness, Ouyang Shuo and the rest finally arrived at the Mo Bay battlefield. System notice. Welcome player not saying you have no clothes, who has arrived at the Eastern Front camp of Western Han, Dai County. The place where Ouyang Shuo descended was the military camp outside Daijun City. Streaks of white light flashed across the camp, signifying the arrival of the mutant army. Right at this moment, the sound of the system notification sounded out by Ouyang Shuo's ears once more. System notice. Congratulations to player not saying you have no clothes, it has been detected that you are a first-rank marquis. Special compensation of 500 military campaign resource points. Friendly reminder. The military campaign resource points can be exchanged for military supplies in the military camp or along the way. They are extremely precious, please use them carefully. Military campaign resource points? It's Gaia's new trick again. Ouyang Shua guessed. Based on the 500 military campaign resource points he received as compensation, a second-rank marquis would receive 200 points, and a third-rank marquis would receive 100 points. As for a first-rank earl, he had just reached the threshold of leading 3,000 troops, so he probably wouldn't receive any additional compensation. This time, Ouyang Shua finally felt a little better. Before he was done, another system notification sounded. System notice. Congratulations to player not saying you have no clothes, it has been detected that you are a first-rank marquis. Special compensation of 10,000 merit points and an additional 15 military campaign contribution points. The battle hadn't even started, and Ouyang Shua had already easily obtained 10,000 merit points, which could be considered a basic compensation. 10,000 merit points might seem like a lot, but compared to the sharp decrease in the number of troops he could lead, it was somewhat insignificant. Originally, Ouyang Shua had thought that he could obtain at least 100,000 merit points in this battle, but now it seemed that his hopes were slim. As for the additional 15 military campaign contribution points reward, how much he could obtain would depend on the ability of Ouyang Shua and the 3,000 divine martial guards he led. Gaia was indeed Gaia. They upheld fairness and didn't deliberately weaken Ouyang Shua's existence. At this point, Ouyang Shua's compensation for his title also came to an end. Ouyang Shua let Wang Feng lead the troops to the camp to settle down, while he stayed in the military camp square and looked around. He wanted to observe which strong opponents would choose Hua Tsubing's route. As far as the eye could see, the mutant army in the military camp was bustling with activity. This was not surprising. In the eyes of the players, Hua Tsubing was in existence on the level of a heavenly king. In the wilderness there were plenty of lords who liked Hua Tsubing. Moreover, Hua Tsubing's subduing mission also seemed to be the least risky. Naturally, the number of lords who chose this route was also the highest. As expected, the military campaign announcement confirmed Ouyang Shua's guess. Military campaign announcement. A total of 45 lords participated in the Battle of Mabe. 22 lords from the Hua Tsubing route, 180,000 lords from the Wei Qing route, and 5 lords from the Li Guang route. 45 lords meant that before the battle even started, 5 lords had already given up. The lords who gave up probably didn't have much hope for this battle. Sometimes, giving up decisively was also a rational choice. Hua Tsubing was indeed the first choice of the lords. Half of the lords chose Hua Tsubing's route. The old general, Li Guang, was quite miserable. Only 5 lords chose his branch. If these 5 people were not carrying some kind of secret weapon, then they were preparing to play a game of blind cats trying to catch a dead mouse. The competition is fierce. Ouyang Shua sighed as he continued to search for targets. Needless to say, he really did meet a few familiar faces. The first was Ouyang Shua's archenemy, Military Kill Ripper, who had just made a name for himself at the auction. Military Kill Ripper also brought 3,000 elite cavalry. Upon closer inspection, they were somewhat different from the Central Plains cavalry. The weapons they used were the rarely seen scimitars. Even the warhorses they rode on were all Mongolian warhorses. Mongolian elite cavalry? Ouyang Shua's eyes narrowed. In that case, Military Kill Ripper had made progress in buying the Mongolian cavalry training manual. The 3,000 elite cavalry he brought this time was the result of his latest training. Military Kill Ripper had put in a lot of effort to bring 3,000 Mongolian elite warhorses. What caught Ouyang Shua's attention was the general standing next to Military Kill Ripper. At first, Ouyang Shua didn't recognize this person. However, the Han soldiers in the barracks were the first to recognize this general. Grand Commandant Marquis Zhou. The entire barracks was in an uproar. Ouyang Shua thought for a moment and guessed who this person was. The famous general of the Western Han dynasty, Zhou Yafu? Ouyang Shua muttered to himself. Military Kill Ripper was really lucky to find such a peerless general through the summoning talisman. Speaking of Zhou Yafu, his most glorious achievement was quelling the rebellion of the Seven States during the reign of Emperor Jing of Han. According to the time shown on the battle map, Zhou Yafu's death was only around 20 years ago. No wonder the Han soldiers in the barracks recognized Zhou Yafu immediately. With this person's help, Military Kill Ripper would probably receive some special treatment. Originally, Ouyang Shua had thought of bringing Han Xian along to build a relationship. But when he thought of Han Xian's tragic ending in history, he gave up on the idea. It was better not to bring up this general's tragic past. Speaking of which, Zhou Yafu was the second son of Marquis Jiang Zhoubo, one of the founding generals of the Western Han dynasty. As for Zhoubo, it was during the Battle of Giant Deer that he officially served under Feng Qiuhuang. Originally, after the Battle of Mabe, when the Western Han dynasty entered the wilderness, it was highly possible that Feng Qiuhuang could directly recruit Zhou Yafu through this relationship. But unexpectedly, Military Kill Ripper beat them to it through the summoning talisman. Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. This person is a formidable opponent. Ouyang Shua didn't want to look at Military Kill Ripper's smug expression anymore and continued to search for other targets. In the Yan-Wang alliance, other than Military Kill Ripper, there were two other people who chose Hua Tsubing's route. They were Di Qin and Zhan Lang, another strong pair of teams. The cavalry that Di Qin brought with him were also riding elite Mongolian warhorses. As for the battle wolves, they were slightly inferior. After all, there weren't any good horses in the Jianya district. As for the green beetle horses in the Lianzhou basin, it was purely a coincidence. Di Qin choosing Hua Tsubing's route was within Ouyang Shua's expectations. After all, Di Qin already had the old General Lian Po, and with the young genius General Hua Tsubing, it was a perfect match. What Ouyang Shua didn't expect was that the battle wolves were also obsessed with Hua Tsubing. The charm of a genius general was indeed extraordinary. In fact, when Ouyang Shua saw Di Qin and the others, Di Qin and the others also noticed Ouyang Shua's presence. For Di Qin and the others, this wasn't good news either. In particular, Di Qin and the others noticed the divine martial guards beside Ouyang Shua. This blood guard had long been famous in the world, and everyone knew about them. In a situation where the number of people in the China region was equal, no one had the confidence to fight against the divine martial guards. What bad luck! Di Qin didn't hide his disappointment. On the other hand, Zhan Lang, who was standing by the side, smiled faintly. Traces of fighting spirit surged in his eyes. On the side of the alliance of mountains and seas, Ouyang Shua was not alone. Like Ouyang Shua, Bai Hua and dragon-seeking acupoint had also chosen Hua Tsubing's route. Needless to say, Zhang Liao and Qin Qiong were also the main candidates for this battle. When the two alliances were compared, the alliance of mountains and seas was not at a disadvantage. Chapter 580. The three members of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas naturally gathered together. Ouyang Shua asked Bai Hua why she chose Hua Tsubing's route. Traveling thousands of miles was an extremely arduous journey for a lady. Therefore, Ouyang Shua was quite surprised to see Bai Hua in Dai County. Because Hua Tsubing is handsome. Bai Hua's answer did not hide her infatuated nature. Ouyang Shua was speechless. What kind of stupid reason was that? Speaking of which, when Great Emperor of Han Wu was a hit, Hua Tsubing had captivated thousands of girls. He did not expect that a homebody like Bai Hua would also fall for it. Big sister, can we stop fooling around? Ouyang Shua was conflicted. Screw you. Bai Hua did not hold back against Ouyang Shua. She punched him and explained with a smile, I will stay in Dai County to see if there are any side missions. General Zhang Liao will be the one to go to war. That's more like it. Ouyang Shua heaved a sigh of relief. At that moment, the person in charge of the military camp gathered the lords for a meeting. Gaia did not choose any mutants to represent them in the Battle of Mabe. They directly gathered them together for a meeting. In the central tent, Ouyang Shua met the commander of the military camp. This person was not the famous champion Marquis Huatsubing, but a nameless general. What's going on? Where's the champion Marquis? This greatly disappointed the lords who wanted to witness Huatsubing's splendor. Among them was a certain infatuated girl. Everyone, please be quiet. The commander of the military camp knew that he was just a bystander, so he directly explained, the White Cavalry General has already led his troops to war 3 days ago. The tent was in an uproar. Already gone to war? What should we do? A lord asked. The current military camp is only a place for the logistics of the army. Everyone can resupply here. Tomorrow morning, you will lead your troops into the desert and chase after the White Cavalry General. The commander said and waved his hand. Immediately, soldiers carried out a pile of blueprints and distributed them to the various lords. What you have now is a simple map of the army, the commander explained. Ouyang Shua took a look and immediately frowned. It's really simple. The entire map was drawn with sheepskin. There were only a few crooked lines, which represented the army's marching route, starting from Dai County and ending at Wolf Story Mountain. As for the water sources, supplies, and the distribution of the Xiongnu tribes along the way, there was nothing at all. Even Ouyang Shua suspected that if he only relied on this map, then not to mention arriving at Wolf Story Mountain, just being able to smoothly pass through the desert would already be extremely fortunate. Great God Gaia, are you really trying to prevent the feudal lords from subduing Huatsubing? Ouyang Shua could not help but complain in his heart. The other lords were also very dissatisfied with the so-called marching map. The first step of the taming mission gave everyone a rude awakening. Some of the lords who had originally wanted to fish in troubled waters were now regretting their decision. Obviously, the difficulty of the mission far exceeded their expectations. Before the battle began, they were still thinking of leading their troops into battle with the main army. Who would have thought that Gu Yu would be so unpredictable? After all, Li Guang was an old general who fought against the Xiongnu. Even so, he was still lost in the desert. From this, it could be seen how dangerous the desert was. For the mutant army like them, entering the gates of hell in the desert without anyone to lead the way would only bode ill rather than well. Even if they were able to successfully leave the desert, finding Huatsubing and his troops in the vast grasslands would also be a difficult task. One must know that Huatsubing's troops were known for their flexibility. Even the Xiongnu often failed to catch them, let alone Huatsubing's troops. Moreover, Huatsubing's troops had already set off 3 days ago. It would be an impossible task to catch up to them. What they were afraid of was not finding the main Han army, but running into the hands of the Xiongnu. Thinking about it, their future was bleak. Some of the feudal lords already had thoughts of retreating. This is too much. Some of the feudal lords grumbled. However, the commanding general of the military camp did not care and directly dismissed the meeting, as if he was a hands-off boss. The feudal lords could only shake their heads helplessly and leave. Walking out of the tent, Bai Hua asked, Wui, what do you think? Before Ouyang Shua could answer, Dragon-seeking Acupoint answered, Gaia will not issue a mission that is impossible to solve. The fact that we don't have any clues means that we haven't found any clues. Dragon-seeking Acupoint was indeed a mission maniac. His understanding of the mission was very precise. Even Bai Hua could not help but nod when he heard this. Then where do you think the clues are? Bai Hua asked. The military camp. Dragon-seeking Acupoint was certain. Oh, what do you mean? Bai Hua was curious. Dragon-seeking acupoint pointed at the rising and falling tents and said with a smile, Dai Prefecture, or the military camp, is the headquarters of Hua Tsubing's route. It's also the logistics hub. This is the only place we can come into contact with. It's impossible for Gaia to hide clues outside of this framework. Is it possible to find clues in Dai Prefecture City? Bai Hua had his own ideas. We can't rule out that possibility. Dragon-seeking acupoint did not jump to conclusions. It seems that we have to split up, Ouyang Shua said. In reality, Ouyang Shua's mind was not on this. Just now, Ouyang Shua had paid special attention to military Kill Ripper and his party. Who would have thought that he would really discover a trace of abnormality? Ouyang Shua noticed that while the other lords were feeling dejected, the corners of Army Kill Ripper's mouth curled up into a complacent smile. Although it was just a flash, it did not escape Ouyang Shua's eyes. Obviously, this was a lord who could not hide his thoughts. Military Kill Ripper was not like Di Chun and Battle Wolf, who could not hide their joy. From the looks of it, the Yen Huang Alliance, or at least Military Kill Ripper, had already received some insider information about this battle. This was the advantage of being a big family. Ouyang Shua was helpless. Of course, Ouyang Shua believed that Military Kill Ripper had obtained some information. Otherwise, the Yen Huang Alliance would have taken a side at the beginning of the battle and made a fuss about it. In reality, only Military Kill Ripper and the other two had chosen Hua Tsubing's route. How interesting! Ouyang Shua was full of fighting spirit. Ouyang Shua did not mention this discovery to Bai Hua and Battle Wolf. No matter what, he had to find the clues for the mission first. Bai Hua was preparing to head into the city, while Dragon Seeking Point was searching the military camp. As for Ouyang Shua, he did not go anywhere, but headed straight for the military camp's supply point. Ouyang Shua wanted to know what kind of supplies the Han army had provided. Apart from that, Ouyang Shua also wanted to know how to use the 500 war resource points that Gaia had given him. According to what the commander of the military camp had said, all the mutant legions could receive supplies. The person in charge of supplies was naturally the camp's rations officer. He was in his 30s and had a fat head and big ears. He had a big belly that was almost bursting out of his general's uniform. There were many lords who came to ask about supplies in front of the warehouse. Ouyang Shua was not in a hurry. He stood to the side and waited patiently. This observation made Ouyang Shua understand a lot of things. It turned out that if an ordinary lord didn't have a battle resource point, he could only receive one supply, and it was limited to 3,000 people. According to the rations officer, not even a grain of rice could be given. The supplies they received were only basic supplies such as biscuits, fodder, and drinking water. At the very least, they would be given some crudely made arrows. As for weapons and equipment, they didn't even have a single one. There were some greedy lords who did not bring enough resources before entering the battle map, hoping to obtain resources like they did in the previous battle map. They would probably cry to death. Gaia was trying to force the lords into a dead end. Ouyang Shua waited for the lords to disperse before he strode forward. Strangely enough, the rations officer acted high and mighty in front of the other lords. But when he saw Ouyang Shua, he immediately changed his attitude and greeted him with a smile as if he was seeing his mother. There's nothing wrong with smiling. He's hiding evil intentions. Ouyang Shua immediately became vigilant. He also discovered that although the rations officer looked like an idiot, he was actually very shrewd. His beady eyes were filled with treachery. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to get such a lucrative job. Marquis, are you here to resupply? The rations officer almost nodded and bowed. With his physique, he could still greet so dexterously. As the saying goes, one doesn't hit a smiling person. No matter how vigilant Ouyang Shua was, there wasn't a trace of arrogance on his face. He asked, "Dare I ask, have you heard of war resource points?" Ouyang Shua noticed that the rations officer's eyes immediately lit up. The smile on his face became more and more flattering. "I've heard of it, I've heard of it." He smiled and nodded vigorously. When Ouyang Shua saw this, he couldn't help but shiver. "How do I exchange for war resource points?" Ouyang Shua continued to ask. "Marquis, please take a look." Like a magic trick, a thin account book suddenly appeared in the rations officer's hand. He respectfully handed it to Ouyang Shua, his eyes filled with greed and desire. The rations officer was dressed sloppily, and even his hands were covered in grease. But this account book was extremely clean, without a trace of dirt. It was obviously an extremely precious item. Ouyang Shua resisted his disgust and took the account book. When he flipped it open, his eyes lit up. So the mystery is here. There were some rare items listed on the account book. The first item on the list made Ouyang Shua overjoyed. Exquisite marching map. Just from the name, one could tell what kind of item it was. Without a doubt, these rare items all needed to be exchanged for war resource points. Just this map required 100 war resource points. Black, so black. Chapter 581. Resource points were good, but it was painful to use them. As the only first-rank marquis in China, Ouyang Shua only received 500 resource points. This was only enough for him to buy a few items from the ration officer's secret account book. He had to be careful. Other than the exquisite military map, there were two other things that made Ouyang Shua very tempted. Rapid marching scroll. After use, increases marching speed by 50 for 4 hours without any side effect. Price, 200 campaign resource points. This was undoubtedly a weapon for rushing at the last moment. With the speed of the Divine Martial Guard, they could travel 200 miles in 4 hours with the help of this scroll. Most importantly, there were no side effects after a rapid march. It wouldn't be a burden on the warhorses. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth it if a group of warhorses died from exhaustion. Ouyang Shua bought it without hesitation. The other item wasn't an item, but a living person. They were the local Xiongnu guides that Ouyang Shua lacked the most. They were familiar with the desert and grassland. The guides sold by the ration officer were also divided into different grades. The best Xiongnu guide was not only familiar with the route, but could also easily find water sources. Apart from that, he was also an outstanding cavalry warrior with a keen sense of smell. In the words of Emperor Wu of Han, he was the best hunting dog. Huotsubing's army could move freely in the hinterland of the Xiongnu because of such people. The guide was good, but it wasn't cheap either. Cost 250 resource points. Currently, Ouyang Shua was the only one who could afford it. The problem was that Ouyang Shua wouldn't have any more resource points to buy a military map after buying this guide. You can have your cake and eat it too. Since he had a living map, he didn't need a dead one anymore. In the end, Ouyang Shua made up his mind and bought the best guide. In just 2 moves, Ouyang Shua had almost used up all the resource points in his hand. Ouyang Shua saw that he couldn't buy anything he liked with the remaining 50 points, so he kept them. Didn't Gaia say that there might be supply points along the way? Perhaps it could even be of use. Since Ouyang Shua was so generous, the grain officer naturally laughed heartily. His fat belly trembled as he laughed. It was a ghastly sight to behold. He even suspected that Gaia had given the provisions officer some special instructions. Ouyang Shua had no intention to investigate this matter any further, and what he wanted to do now was to inspect the goods on the spot. Ouyang Shua put away the rapid marching scroll, and the top-notch guide also revealed his true appearance. At first glance, he looked like a typical Xiongnu. His facial features were clearly different from that of a Han. He was wearing a Han army uniform, which was quite unique. "Marquis, this lowly Huyen Chiu pays his respects to you." Ouyang Shua nodded and left with Huyen Chiu. After making such a big deal, the grain officer was surprisingly generous for once. He promised Ouyang Shua that he would supply his troops with sincerity. When Ouyang Shua heard this, he nodded in thanks. At 4 in the afternoon, Bai Hua returned to the barracks. Bai Hua didn't find any clues about the quest, but he did receive a few side quests. Because of this, Bai Hua was determined to stay in Dai County. Then, Ouyang Shua told Bai Hua about the war resource points. Bai Hua was now a second-rank marquis, and he had 200 war resource points. He could be considered a tycoon among the lords. Bai Hua's eyes lit up when he heard this, and he turned around and left. As for the quest Dragon-Seeking Acupoint, he really found some clues. Other than asking about some bits and pieces of information, he was also lucky enough to recruit a crippled guide. Although this guide couldn't be compared to Huyen Qiu, he was still free. He was probably the same as the most ordinary guide sold by the grain officer. He had nearly 100 war resource points left. He had to admit that in terms of the quest, Dragon-Seeking Acupoint was indeed outstanding. As for the usage of the war resource points, Dragon-Seeking Acupoint had naturally been discovered, so there was no need for Ouyang Shua to tell him. Ouyang Shua didn't ask about what the two exchanged for. In the end, there was only one person who could subdue Hua Tsubing. Although they were allies, strictly speaking, they were still competitors at this moment. At most, they could only work together in the early stages. As for not stabbing him in the back at the last moment, that was already good enough. Night fell amidst all the commotion. Dai County was located at the edge of the desert, and the weather was abnormally dry. From afar, one could vaguely see the sun slowly setting in the depths of the desert. The afterglow of the setting sun dyed the desert in a golden color. It was a beautiful sight. Who could have imagined what kind of murderous intent was hidden within this beauty? Under Huyen Qiu's guidance, the 3,000 divine martial guards had completed their resupply. The grain officer was a man of his word, and for once, he was generous and actually gave them 50 warhorses. One must know that in the Han Dynasty, a good warhorse was worth tens of thousands of gold. When a mutant army entered the battlefield, they couldn't bring extra warhorses. A cavalry could only bring one warhorse. Thus, although a divine martial guard had 3 warhorses, they couldn't bring them to the battlefield. Although 50 warhorses wasn't a lot, they could still be used in emergencies. It seemed that Ouyang Shua had indeed let the grain officer earn a lot. Apart from the warhorses, there were also some secret weapons that the Han army had prepared to deal with the desert. Ouyang Shua didn't understand the bits and pieces. On the other hand, Huyen Qiu couldn't help but nod his head when he saw it. It was obvious that the grain officer didn't lie to him. He had indeed taken out his trump card. When the other lords saw this, they couldn't help but be envious. The sun set in the west, and night officially fell. After a day of clamor, the barracks finally quieted down. Tomorrow morning, all the divisions would set out for battle. Next, they would naturally have a good night's rest to build up their strength. For the mutant army, this was probably the most peaceful night they could sleep. The entire barracks was silent. Late at night, Ouyang Shua was sleeping, yet he faintly heard a wave of woo-woo sounds. Not good. Ouyang Shua immediately woke up. He could tell that it was Whitey's voice. When Whitey appeared in the barracks, it attracted a lot of attention. No one expected that Marquis Lian Zhou would actually bring a spirit beast, a white wolf, into the battlefield. When they thought of the desert environment, some clever lords couldn't hide the envy in their eyes. Ouyang Shua quickly got up and walked out of the tent. Marquis. The guards on night duty saluted in surprise. Ouyang Shua waved his hand and followed the sound to a corner of the barracks. The guards looked at each other. When they sensed the change in the Marquis, they quickly followed him. The Tang saber that hung on his waist was already in his hand. The atmosphere in the barracks suddenly became tense. Whining, Whitey's voice became more and more urgent, and it even sounded like it was in pain. When Ouyang Shua saw this, his face became colder, and he started to jog. The 2 guards behind him were even more astonished. The two of them looked at each other again, and one of them quietly turned around and left. After turning around a tent, Ouyang Shuo finally saw Xiao Bai behind it. The scene in front of him made him extremely angry. He saw a dozen soldiers surrounding Whitey and stabbing it with their spears. If it wasn't for Whitey's supernatural abilities and the fact that it had cultivated in the Spirit Beast Pavilion, it would have died on the spot. Even so, Whitey's body was already covered in blood. Ouyang Shuo also noticed that there were two soldiers lying behind the encirclement, and he didn't know if they were dead or alive. If there was no accident, they should have been injured by Whitey. "Who's there?" This group of people was quite vigilant. "How dare you!" Ouyang Shuo shouted, and the Scarlet Knight sword was already out of its sheath. At this moment, the Scarlet Knight sword was already very different from before. The soul of the Red Dragon was successfully injected into the Scarlet Knight sword by Oyezi, and it became a sword spirit. Although the Scarlet Sky sword did not advance and become a top-notch saint artifact in one go, its power and spirituality were much more mystical than ordinary saint artifacts. If it encountered any opportunities, the Scarlet Knight sword would advance to a holy weapon soon. When the Scarlet Knight sword was out of its sheath, the swords on the waists of the others couldn't help but tremble. At this moment, the Scarlet Knight sword already had the posture of the owner of all swords. Any other treasured sword would be inferior to the Scarlet Knight sword. Marquis Lianzhou. Someone recognized Ouyang Shuo, and a trace of panic flashed in his eyes. At this moment, the soldiers were about to scatter and flee in all directions without thinking. Want to leave? It's too late. Ouyang Shuo raised his sword and charged into the crowd. Sword light flashed. The killing sword appeared in the military camp again. Boundless killing intent enveloped the entire battlefield. The soldiers who were about to escape suddenly arrived, and with the addition of a great force, it made it difficult for them to move. This was the aura field. The sword aura field of the killing sword. Just how terrifying was this aura? Ouyang Shuo wandered around, and when the sword light flashed, the enemies fell to the ground. The guards behind Ouyang Shuo, including Whitey, also joined the battle. In less than 10 minutes, all 15 soldiers fell to the ground. Ouyang Shuo didn't kill them. He still wanted to find out which force these people belonged to. The enemy's intention could be said to be vicious. They must have discovered Whitey's miraculous ability and were afraid that Ouyang Shuo would take the lead, so they wanted to take advantage of the dark and windy night to get rid of a big hidden danger. However, they never thought that the inconspicuous Whitey's battle strength would be so shocking. Under the siege of more than 10 elite soldiers, it didn't fall into a disadvantageous position at all. What was more unexpected was that even though Ouyang Shuo was asleep, his perception was still so sharp. He immediately sensed that Whitey was in trouble and quickly came to help. Otherwise, their plot would really succeed. Ouyang Shuo wanted to see who it was that wanted to use such a despicable method. Chapter 582. Just as Ouyang Shuo took down more than a dozen soldiers, the sound of footsteps came from the darkness. Ouyang Shuo narrowed his eyes and held his sword. An entire platoon of soldiers appeared in Ouyang Shuo's field of vision. The military uniforms they were wearing were exactly the same as the soldiers from before. Are they together? Ouyang Shuo muttered to himself. Even Ouyang Shuo had to think twice before fighting against 100 soldiers alone. Fortunately, Ouyang Shuo wasn't fighting alone. Just as the other side was about to forcefully attack and take away the wounded soldiers on the ground, another set of footsteps came from the darkness. It was Chun Damering and his personal guards rushing over. The guards on night duty sensed that something was wrong and went to inform their captain. Chun Damering finally arrived before the crossfire. The two teams happened to run into each other. The small space was crowded. The smell of gunpowder permeated the air. Marquis. Chun Damering glanced at the other side and calmly saluted Ouyang Shuo. Take them down. Ouyang Shuo didn't hesitate. The platoon that had just arrived should be the enemy's reinforcement. Seeing that they had been exposed, they wanted to bluff their way out or destroy the evidence. How could Ouyang Shuo allow them to be so unscrupulous? Chen Damring didn't say a word and directly led his team to charge at the enemy. The divine martial guards had never been afraid of anyone in a one-on-one fight. Not to mention that the personal guards were the most elite of the divine martial guards. The battle between the two sides had completely broken the peace of the camp and alarmed all the forces. The surroundings of the tent were filled with lords who had come to watch the show. Their eyes narrowed when they saw Ouyang Shuo standing there with his sword. Then, they noticed the blood-stained whitey next to Ouyang Shuo, and a flash of understanding flashed in their eyes. This group of fellows really wanted to watch a good show and didn't mind the matter getting bigger. Ouyang Shuo was expressionless when he saw this. Chen Damring didn't disappoint him. By the time the Han patrol arrived, the enemy had already been taken down by Chen Damring's team. "Marquis, what's going on?" the leading officer asked. Ouyang Shuo then explained the entire incident to Qin Nan. This time, there was a complete uproar. There were witnesses and material evidence. Even if he wanted to deny it, he probably couldn't. The problem was that this was a battle map, and the troops brought by each lord were not registered in the barracks. It would be difficult to find out which territory this army was from. The officer had a troubled look on his face. He was afraid that Ouyang Shuo would take the opportunity to stir up trouble. Ouyang Shuo looked around at the surrounding lords and said coldly, "What? You dare to do it but don't dare to admit it? Only a despicable person would use such a despicable method." The entire place was silent. Since the other party had done this in secret, he would naturally not stand out and admit it. Regardless of whether they were present or not, they were all suspects. Since no one admitted it, Ouyang Shuo was helpless. Time was limited, and he couldn't interrogate them one by one. "Sir, leave these people to me, how about it?" Ouyang Shuo turned around and looked at the patrol captain. "Marquis, please go ahead." The patrol captain was naturally happy to shift the blame. Generally speaking, they would try not to get involved in the conflicts between the mutants if they could. Ouyang Shuo nodded. Then, his eyes suddenly turned cold and he gave Chen Damring a look. Chen Damring understood. Without any hesitation, he led his troops forward and placed the Tang sabers on the enemy's neck. He was going to execute them on the spot. The captured soldiers did have some gut. None of them actually begged for mercy. Chen Damring was the first to swing his Tang saber. In an instant, more than 100 heads fell to the ground, and blood flowed everywhere. The blood vividly displayed the cruelty of this battle. Before the army set off, the lords had already started stabbing each other with knives, trying to get rid of each other. Among the crowd, someone's face twitched involuntarily. Seeing how ruthless the Marquis of Lianzhou was, the surrounding lords felt a chill down their neck. Ouyang Shuo wanted to use this to establish his might and warn his other opponents to not rashly target him. Don't touch the butt of a tiger. Otherwise, you might end up losing the rice you used to steal a chicken. After the execution was over, this matter came to an end. Ouyang Shuo didn't want to find out who the mastermind was. As long as this mission wasn't over, the other party would show their tails sooner or later. After the storm, the camp returned to peace. As for those who couldn't sleep well, that was another matter. The second half of the night was calm. The next morning, the camp was bustling again. Last night's disturbance didn't affect the lords' enthusiasm at all. Some of the more impatient ones had already led their troops out of the camp and into the vast desert. Ouyang Shuo didn't stay for long. He met up with Zhang Liao's troops and the dragon-seeking acupuncture unit and left the camp. Early in the morning, the sun rose. The vast desert was calm. The undulating desert was as gentle as a woman's boudoir. With that, the lord's fear of grand desert lessened somewhat. Huyen Qiu was the only one who immediately entered the desert. Sometimes he would observe the terrain of the desert, and sometimes he would look up at the sky. He didn't look relaxed. Ouyang Shua rode on his warhorse and looked around. Because they had just entered the desert, the troops didn't spread out. There were mutant troops in front, behind, left, and right. The sharp-eyed Ouyang Shua noticed that some of the lords were looking at them strangely. He had faintly felt this kind of gaze last night. This morning, the feeling of being watched became more and more intense. After careful observation, it wasn't hard to see that there were at least 6 troops trailing far behind them. They were probably being watched by someone. Big brother, something's wrong. The dragon-seeking acupuncture unit wasn't a fool. He also noticed something was wrong and came to Ouyang Shua's side. Ouyang Shua nodded. Yes, something's wrong. But why? There's no reason to fight us now. It won't do them any good. There are people who would do such a thankless thing? The dragon-seeking acupuncture unit didn't hide his doubts. Under normal circumstances, there wouldn't be. But if someone is deliberately provoking us, then it's hard to say. Ouyang Shua slowly sorted out his thoughts and said ambiguously. You mean Di Chun and the others? The dragon-seeking acupuncture unit immediately understood. Besides them, who else likes to play these little tricks? Ouyang Shua said. What could it be that made these lords dare to take such a risk? The dragon-seeking acupuncture unit muttered to himself. Then, he said slowly, could it be something that can be exchanged for military resource points? Ouyang Shua nodded approvingly and said with a smile, most likely. Not to mention other things, just the exquisite military map was enough to make these lords scramble for it. Without this map, they basically had no chance of winning. That was why these lords were willing to take such a risk. How despicable! The dragon-seeking acupuncture unit didn't hide his disdain for Di Chun and the others. However, Ouyang Shua remained indifferent. He was afraid that Di Chun and the others would be fooled by their own cleverness. How could a lord who could squeeze his territory into the top 50 in China be a fool? Yes, Ouyang Shua and the others had military resource points, but didn't Di Chun and the others have military resource points? It wasn't hard to come up with a conclusion. Compared to them, the 3 allied armies of the Shanghai Alliance were even more difficult to deal with. Presumably, Di Chun and the others had also realized this point. When they set off in the morning, Ouyang Shua especially looked around, but he didn't see the 3 from the Yan-Huang Alliance. They should have already left. Even so, Ouyang Shua believed that there must be a group of rats following behind them. The current situation was that the 2 allied armies had become the targets of the other lord. This mission is getting more and more interesting. Ouyang Shua smiled. The dragon-seeking acupuncture unit was dumbfounded. He didn't know how his big brother could still smile at this time. Scratching his head, he could only bitterly return to the army. Just like that, Ouyang Shua led his troops forward slowly in the vast desert with a group of people following behind him. To the lords behind them, they didn't want to rob them directly. If they could just follow the army of Shanghai City, why would they bother? Of course, if someone was willing to be the vanguard, it would be a different story. For the entire morning, the atmosphere was unusually harmonious. The mutant army had truly entered the depths of the desert. Looking around, there was only endless desert in front of them. Apart from sand, there was only sand in their eyes. At the beginning, their curiosity towards the desert had turned into boredom and boredom. Especially as time passed, the temperature of the desert became higher and higher. By noon, the scorching sun was already high in the sky. The scorching sun scorched the earth, making it hard for people to raise their spirit. These mutant armies had no experience in fighting in the desert. It was even their first time seeing the desert. Therefore, under such circumstances, the entire team seemed rather listless. Even Little White was a little listless. Last night, Ouyang Shua had checked on Little White's injuries. Luckily, they were only superficial wounds. After applying medicine on them, Little White's body was fine. Marquis, something's wrong. Suddenly, Huyen Qiu, who had been silent all this time, came to Ouyang Shua's side. What's wrong? Ouyang Shuo asked. Looking at the situation, I'm afraid that a sandstorm will come soon. Huyen Qiu reported the bad news. Hearing this, Ouyang Shuo looked up at the sky and saw that the sky was high and the clouds were light. He couldn't see anything strange at all. Of course, Huyen Qiu was a professional, so Ouyang Shuo naturally followed his advice. He immediately ordered the army to shrink their formation. Can we find a place to hide from the wind? Ouyang Shuo asked. Facing a sandstorm, it was obviously the worst plan. Chapter 583. Marquis, there is a desert not far ahead. We can temporarily avoid the sandstorm. Huyen Qiu was indeed a living map of the desert. He had been paying attention to the inconspicuous coordinates in the desert and was very clear about the surrounding environment. He immediately pointed out a clear path for the army. Ouyang Shuo felt relieved when he heard this. Just based on this point alone, 250 campaign resource points were well spent. He immediately let Huyen Qiu lead the way, and the army began to speed up, trying to find a place to rest in the desert before the sandstorm arrived. The people at the back also wanted to follow. This time, Ouyang Shuo was not so easy to deal with. He let the divine martial guards guard the rear and shot a wave of arrows at the back as a warning. With this warning, the enemy did not dare to approach. They only arranged for a few spies to watch from afar. As for the majority of the army, they slowly followed behind. In the eyes of the feudal lords, there was still a long way to go. As long as they knew the whereabouts of the Shanghai City army, they would not be afraid of getting lost in the desert. They did not know that Ouyang Shuo was already using the sandstorm to dig a big hole for them. Half an hour later, they saw the desert. Ouyang Shuo ordered the army to dismount and pretend to rest on the spot. In reality, the army was already secretly setting up a formation. At this moment, the sky of the desert suddenly became turbid. The terrifying sandstorm arrived as expected. The previously calm desert was suddenly filled with dust and smoke. Even further away, a sandstorm that blotted out the sky and covered the sun swept over like a stormy sea. The beautiful sky instantly became pitch black. Only the howling of the wind could be heard in the entire world. It was only at this moment that the mutant army at the back realized that the sandstorm was coming. Immediately, they wailed like ghosts and howled like wolves. They wanted to hide in the desert like the army of Shanghai City, but it was already too late. This was because in front of the desert, 9,000 elite cavalrymen were already waiting in formation. Any enemy that charged over would face a wave of arrows. This time, the mutant army was immediately in a desperate situation. Forward or backward, it was a dead end. The violent sandstorm swept over at a speed that left a trail of dust in its wake. The people in the desert were instantly thrown off their feet. The mutant army finally saw the violent side of the desert. Even the army of Shanghai City, which was backed by the desert, was struggling to hold on. If they were not careful, they would be swept away by the sandstorm. All of a sudden, everyone was thrown off their feet. Ouyang Shuo was surrounded by the army, unable to open his eyes. As far as the eye could see, all around him was a gray and hazy sandstorm. It was as if he was in the midst of doomsday. From time to time, miserable shrieks could be heard. Every minute and second felt like an eternity. In the face of the mighty power of heaven and earth, a person seemed so insignificant. After an unknown period of time, the rolling sandstorm finally swept past and disappeared into the distance. Ouyang Shuo struggled to open his eyes. His entire body was covered in sand. And this was already very fortunate. Even further away, the mutant army that was unfortunately caught in the sandstorm had already been scattered. In Ouyang Shuo's heart, there was no trace of pity in his heart. Where are the generals? Ouyang Shuo took a deep breath and shouted. Here! Wang Feng, Zhang Liao, and Qin Qiong stepped forward. Before they set off, it was already agreed that Ouyang Shuo would be the sole commander of the army. He alone was to command the three armies. Therefore, Zhang Liao and Qin Qiong did not dare to be negligent at this moment. Immediately reorganize the troops. While the enemy is scattered and unstable, completely annihilate them. Ouyang Shuo unsheathed his sword and pointed it forward. Yes, General. The three generals' blood was instantly boiling. They liked this kind of direct and efficient battle. As for taking advantage of the enemy's precarious position, this was war, not a child's play. It was not a place to talk about propriety and honor. After a while, the army was already in formation. Kill! Under the leadership of the three generals, the army turned out in full force. Ouyang Shuo, under the protection of his personal guards, was in the middle of the command and did not attack. For the mutant army, it was simply a bad start. A sandstorm had caused them to lose more than half of their soldiers. Most of the soldiers did not die, but were scattered by the sandstorm and buried under the sand dunes. If they were rescued in time, they would be able to gather the remnants of the army. Unfortunately, Ouyang Shuo did not give them this opportunity. The mighty army of Shanghai City charged forward with a thunderous rumble. To these lords, at this moment, it was as if the sky was about to collapse. They regretted it so much. They had been bewitched by Di Chen and the others, and this was what they deserved. There was no suspense in this sudden attack in the desert. In less than 2 hours, the 5 or 6 mutant armies that followed behind the army of Shanghai City were almost completely annihilated. Even the enemies who were fleeing in all directions were chased down and cut down from their horses. In front of the desolate desert, there were piles of corpses. Gusts of sand blew, and the corpses were quickly buried by the sand dunes. A month later, who would know that a great battle had taken place here? Only the white bones buried deep under the sand dunes silently recounted this unknown history. This was the desert. It was calm, violent, warm, and emotionless. No matter which side it was the truest side of it. What made Ouyang Shuo's expression strange was that during the battle, he actually saw his contribution points rising rapidly. Are there contribution points for killing soldiers of the same camp? Oh, Gaia is really two-faced. In this battle, there are no camps at all. As long as they are not from the same territory, they are all enemies. In the end, there can only be one person who wins. Ouyang Shuo began to understand Gaia's intentions. In this way, the battle between the lords would probably become more and more cruel. Even if he could not subdue Hua Tsubing in the end, it would be good to gain some contribution points and earn some merit points. After the battle, because they were in a hurry, Ouyang Shuo did not clean up the battlefield and immediately led his troops to set off. While the sun had not completely set, the army could still travel a bit further. Evening was the best time to march. At this time, the temperature was pleasant, neither too hot nor too cold. If it really came to night, they could only spend the night in their tents. After shaking off the tail, the army easily set off. In the great desert, the lonely smoke rises, and the long river sets as the round sun. Looking at the orange sun, Ouyang Shuo could not help but think of this poem that had been passed down for thousands of years. Did the poet Wang Wei feel the same way back then? Ouyang Shuo did not know. As the afterglow of the setting sun shone on the golden sand dunes. After marching for a day, the army chose a suitable location under Huyen Qiu's guidance and set up camp in the desert. As soon as the army stopped, Huyen Qiu led a group of people out to fetch water. The water sacks that the cavalrymen were equipped with could only last for 2 days if used sparingly. The battle during the day had consumed even more water than before. Therefore, they had to quickly replenish their water supply during the rest time. Otherwise, they would not be able to march tomorrow. Ouyang Shuo could not imagine how they would have successfully found water in the vast desert if they had not recruited Huyen Qiu. Di Chen and the others were probably the same, right? He just didn't know if they had avoided the sandstorm during the day. Ouyang Shuo thought maliciously. The next 2 days were calm and peaceful. They did not even see a single mutant army. Ouyang Shua estimated that after entering the desert, the surviving mutant army would have already dispersed. Marquis, we will be out of the desert in 3 days. After setting up camp, Huyen Qiu reported the journey to Ouyang Shua as usual. Ouyang Shua smiled and nodded. Thank you for your hard work. He was not just being polite. It was all thanks to Huyen Qiu's guidance that the army had been able to advance so smoothly. Huyen Qiu had been able to find water almost every day. The tens of thousands of soldiers had never stopped drinking water. It had to be said that this was no small miracle. Apart from drinking water, they also discovered the traces left behind by the main Han army. This made Ouyang Shua very excited. When he thought that Huotsubing's department was not far ahead, Ouyang Shua could not help but feel excited. Accidents always happened at the most unexpected times. That night was undoubtedly a test that was neither too big nor too small for the army of Shanghai City. 2 figures suddenly appeared on a sand dune far away from the camp. These 2 people were dressed in tattered clothes, but they were tightly wrapped and had their faces covered. Their dusty clothes were difficult to detect in the desert. They had been following the army of Shanghai City for more than a day. Big brother, look at their formation and the layout of their camp. They don't look like ordinary Han soldiers, one of them said in a hoarse voice. He's not ordinary, a slightly older man replied in a deep voice. Then, why don't we retreat? The hoarse lackey hesitated. Retreat? I want to retreat too. The older man's voice was filled with bitterness. It's a pity that we're out of food. If we don't do something soon, we'll be starving. Won't it be too risky? The younger man was still a little afraid. To these desert bandits, the Han army was an existence that they could not afford to offend. If they were to poke a hornet's nest, they would be killed by the Han army. Therefore, it had become an unspoken rule among the desert bandits not to rob the official army. Of course, there was always an exception. For example, when they were at their wits' end. During this period of time, the Han army frequently attacked the Xiongnu, cutting off the trade route. The desert bandits did not have an easy time. At the end of the day, these bandits were also living a life of blood. If he really wanted them to die, he would do anything crazy. As a result, a group of desert bandits had their eyes on the army of Shanghai City. What they wanted were the military rations that the cavalrymen carried. When the desert bandits noticed these magical pills, they could not help but drool. They did not make a move because they were gathering reinforcements. This time, the 2 strongest groups of desert bandits in the desert were going to work together for a big operation. The 2 men on the sand dune were only in charge of monitoring the army. The main force, which consisted of tens of thousands of desert bandits, was still secretly gathering behind them. The time of the operation was set to be tonight. Chapter 584. The desert bandits chose to attack at around 8 o'clock at night. At this time, the soldiers had already gone to bed. The entire camp was quiet. Only the night wind whistled past, blowing the bonfire outside the tent up and down, making it erratic. Looking at the starry sky, the Milky Way hung upside down and the bright moon hung high. Together with the vast desert, it gave people a sense of loneliness and serenity. Who's there? The soldiers in charge of guarding the perimeter noticed the flickering torches in the distance. Pucci! What answered him was a sharp arrow. The desert bandits that had been hiding for a long time finally bared their fangs and chose to bite. 40 to 50,000 desert bandits came from all directions, surrounding the campsite so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Tens of thousands of torches illuminated the desert as if it were daytime. The soldiers on guard fell to the ground one after another after being hit by the arrows. The muffled scolding alerted the patrolling team in the camp. Then, the entire camp was awakened. In an instant, the silence disappeared and was replaced by a wave of clamor. Ouyang Shua had already given strict orders to march in the desert. Other than the patrolling team, all the soldiers were to sleep without taking off their armors. Their weapons were placed next to their pillows to ensure that they could join the battle at any time. He was guarding against the other mutant armies. Unexpectedly, the desert bandits came instead of the mutant armies. "What's going on?" Ouyang Shua held his sword and walked out of the tent. Reporting to the Marquis, "It's the desert bandits." The captain of the guards, Chun Damring, the most loyal guard, came to the commander's tent immediately. "Desert bandits?" Ouyang Shua was startled. "How dare they?" Ouyang Shua's voice was not loud, but anyone could feel the murderous intent in it. "Guards!" Ouyang Shua drew his sword again. "Here! Attack with me!" Ouyang Shua was ready to take action himself. Yes, the entire campsite had already fallen into a mess of killing and was in a complete mess. It was impossible to organize a battle formation or set up any rules. The only way was to fight the desert bandits with their swords and spears. They would kill them until they were defeated. Because of that, Ouyang Shua did not bother to think about commanding the troops at all. He raised his sword and led his personal guards into the battlefield. Needless to say, the desert bandits' timing was impeccable. Desert bandits were best at fighting at night. Especially in the Great Desert, they were the local tyrants and were familiar with the road. Even if they moved at night, there were no obstacles. On the other hand, the Allied army was suddenly attacked. Although they were not in a sorry state and were defeated by the enemy in a single strike, they were still in a hurry to fight. More importantly, the 9,000-strong Allied army was composed entirely of cavalry. Now, the knights had no choice but to engage in close combat with the desert bandits, abandoning the charge that they were best at. This was a great taboo for military strategists. Fortunately, there were still 3,000 divine guards at the forefront. The divine martial guards were experts in both infantry and cavalry. Mounted, they were invincible cavalry. Dismounted, they were the most valiant warriors. Kill! Some desert bandits noticed Ouyang Shua's group and quickly surrounded them. Ouyang Shua laughed coldly as he spun the Crimson Sky sword and slashed out with a backhand, chopping a desert bandit to death in a straightforward and efficient manner. Then, he slid into the middle of the desert bandits and engaged in close combat. The killing sword was born for the battlefield. How could ordinary desert bandits be Ouyang Shua's match? Especially the desert bandits' equipment. Using simple to describe them was overestimating them. They were simply too shabby. Looking around, there wasn't a single piece of metal armor. Their bodies were loose and all covered in leather armor, some even just plain cloth clothes. Ouyang Shua couldn't imagine who gave them the courage to attack the army. Such defense was no different from tofu in front of the Crimson Sky sword. In an instant, Ouyang Shua led his personal guards and killed everyone on the battlefield. In a short while, there were already dozens of corpses of desert bandits beneath Ouyang Shua's feet. When the surrounding warriors saw this, their morale was greatly boosted. The leader of the desert bandits wasn't a fool and immediately noticed the changes on the battlefield. Ordinary men couldn't even get close to Ouyang Shua. They wanted to shoot arrows from the back? The personal guards seemed to be standing casually, but in reality, they had already surrounded Ouyang Shua tightly. The desert bandits finally saw how terrifying an elite army was. It was a world of difference compared to the caravan guards they had killed before. After the initial panic, even if they didn't have the advantage in numbers, the army launched an orderly counterattack. The soldiers were organized into platoons and moved about freely on the battlefield. On the other hand, once the desert bandits started fighting, they fought for themselves and became a mess. The situation gradually became disadvantageous to the desert bandit. A trace of regret flashed in the heart of the leader of the desert bandits. Helpless, the arrow on the bow had to be fired. The leader of the desert bandits was prepared to personally make an appearance. His target was Ouyang Shua. He gathered a group of the most elite desert bandits and pounced towards Ouyang Shua. Motherf***, is there finally a tough one? Chen Daming said with a sinister expression as he waved his saber and chopped off the head of a desert bandit. Looking at his appearance and tone, he was more like a bandit than the desert bandits. This personal guard captain wasn't someone to be trifled with. Under Ouyang Shua's personal guidance, his combat strength increased day by day. Even Wang Feng had to fight over 100 rounds against Chen Daming before he had the confidence to take him down. This time, the leader of the desert bandits had met his match. The two burly men collided, and it was hard to tell who would gain the upper hand. Ouyang Shua was on the battlefield, but he didn't think of killing the leader to show off his bravery. To him, this battle was the best place to temper his killing sword. Even elite desert bandits couldn't withstand the sharpness of the killing sword. Especially towards the end of the battle, blood mist condensed on the blade of the Scarlet Knight sword, which was even more terrifying. Clang! The Scarlet Knight sword clashed with a longsword. Something's wrong. As soon as they clashed, Ouyang Shua felt that the desert bandits opposite him weren't simple. The other party's sword seemed soft and powerless, but the angle of attack was extremely tricky. Moreover, the sword was extremely fast and every move was fatal. It's an expert. Ouyang Shua raised his head and glanced at the other party. It was just an ordinary-looking desert bandit. Humph! Ouyang Shua snorted coldly and raised his sword to meet the bandit again. He didn't believe that there was someone among the desert bandits who could contend against him. The more they exchanged blows, the more Ouyang Shua felt uncomfortable. The enemy in front of him was simply the most cunning fox, or rather, a venomous snake. He relied on his agility and didn't fight head-on with Ouyang Shua. He constantly retreated into the crowd and used it as cover. When Ouyang Shua wasn't paying attention, he would suddenly attack again. Every time, Ouyang Shua would break out in cold sweat. How despicable! Ouyang Shua was somewhat infuriated by the other party. The Scarlet Knight's sword in his hand became sharper and sharper, and every move was fatal. Since you want to hide, then I'll kill all the enemies in front of me. Ouyang Shua thought to himself. He couldn't be blamed for being so conceited. Ever since he mastered the inner cannon of the Yellow Emperor and cultivated it into a killing sword, Ouyang Shua had rarely suffered such a loss. Even if it was Chiyu, he still dared to raise his sword and charge forward. But now, he had been tricked by a nameless person. How could he not be angry? The Scarlet Knight's sword seemed to have sensed Ouyang Shua's thoughts and seemed to be even more excited. Ouyang Shua discovered that he could actually clearly feel the feelings that the Scarlet Knight's sword's sword spirit transmitted to him. Go on a killing spree? Ouyang Shua muttered to himself. All right, as you wish. This time, Ouyang Shua circulated the true essence in his body. Golden true essence quietly covered the blade of the Scarlet Knight's sword. Gold and red intertwined and reflected off each other. With the assistance of true essence, the Scarlet Knight's sword became even sharper. Before it even got close, the enemy felt waves of sharpness that were like needles stabbing them. The bandit's weapon was immediately cut into two when it came into contact with the Scarlet Knight's sword. Such might was simply unparalleled. Ouyang Shua seemed to be killing indiscriminately, but in reality, more than half of his energy was secretly guarding against the bandit that sneak attacked him earlier. This time, Ouyang Shua wanted to make the other party suffer a crushing defeat. Sure enough, when the bandit with an ordinary appearance saw that Ouyang Shua was a killing spree, a trace of a cold smile flashed on the corners of his mouth. He quietly circled around Ouyang Shua's back, and the long sword in his hand pierced towards Ouyang Shua's heart like a venomous snake. I've finally caught you. Ouyang Shua smiled instead. His feet moved, and his body suddenly leaned to the side, dodging the other party's attack. Before he completely turned around, the Scarlet Knight's sword in his hand had already stuck to the other party's long sword and slid past. A sword light flashed, and the Scarlet Knight's sword seemed to have intelligence as it directly pierced into the other party's body. Only at this time did Ouyang Shua turn around. Once he succeeded, Ouyang Shua naturally wouldn't show mercy. The Scarlet Knight sword turned and shook, completely shattering the other party's 5 viscera and 6 bowels. Wu, the bandit, stared at Ouyang Shua with an incredulous gaze as he fell to the ground and died. Great leader! At this time, the surrounding bandits cried out in alarm. So that's how it is. Ouyang Shua suddenly understood. This ordinary-looking bandit was the leader of another bandit organization. When the first leader was fighting with Chen Damrung, he quietly snuck to Ouyang Shua's side and prepared to launch a sneak attack. He didn't expect that in the end, he still lost his life under the Scarlet Knight sword. Once the leader died, the bandits instantly lost their will to fight. The entire battlefield began to loosen up. When the leader who was fighting with Chen Damrung saw this, his face darkened, but he was also unusually courageous. He blocked Chen Damrung's broadsword and shouted loudly, "Retreat!" Turning around, he disappeared from the battlefield under the escort of his trusted subordinates. Bastard! Seeing this, Chen Damrung stomped his feet in anger, feeling very humiliated. As the leader retreated, the remaining bandits retreated like the tide. The bandits were worthy of being the local tyrants. The army of Shanghai City was just about to mount their war horses and prepare to chase out of the camp. As far as the eye could see, in the vast desert, where could they still see the figures of the bandits? They really came and went without a trace. In the end, the army could only resentfully give up. As for Ouyang Shua, he casually picked up a token. This token was dropped by the leader of the bandits after his death. Other than that, there was nothing else. After the battle, Ouyang Shua's battle contribution points increased by tens of thousands again. Chapter 585. After the battle, the 3 generals came to Ouyang Shua's tent and reported the casualties of the battle to him. Although they managed to repel the desert bandits, the Allied forces also suffered a lot of casualties. Both Lingxi City and Dragon-Seeking City had lost more than 500 men each. Even the most elite divine martial guards lost more than 100 people. The savagery of the desert bandits was not just for show. After everyone dispersed, Ouyang Shua finally had time to look at the token. Campaign Token New. An unknown campaign token that can only be used in specific places. The attributes of the token puzzled Ouyang Shua. He did not know how to use this token. The only information was that the token could only be used on the battle map. As for the rest, he knew nothing. There were too many mysteries about this battle that Ouyang Shua could not understand. The setting of the battle between Gaia and the desert completely overturned the previous battle settings. Ouyang Shua could no longer gain the upper hand like in the previous battles. Instead, he was passive and faced endless troubles. Scorching sun, sandstorm, desert bandits, Gaia's tests came one after another, making people unable to rest in peace. Based on the current situation, there would be no more than 10 mutant armies that could walk out of the desert in the end. The next day, the army set off again. Perhaps it was because they had killed the 2 largest groups of desert bandits in the desert, the rest of the army's journey was smooth. On the afternoon of the 5th day of the battle, the army finally passed through the desert and entered the grassland. The barren and deathly silent desert was connected to the lush green grassland. It was abrupt and natural. One side represented death, while the other represented life. 2 completely different hues in this place, perfectly intersected. The boundary between life and death was so clear. Even so, Ouyang Shua did not feel happy at all as he looked at the endless grassland. Gaia was not a philanthropist. Walking out of the desert was just Gaia's entrance test for the overlords. The real test was still on this seemingly harmless grassland, because countless Xiongnu tribes lived here. They were scattered all over the place, making it impossible to guard against them. The mutant army would face an even harsher test. At that time, they would have to kill each other. Under the double test, only the strongest could reach the end. How could a god-level martial general be so easily subdued? Pass down my order. Have all the officers and soldiers raise their spirits, and don't slack off," Ouyang Shuo ordered. "Yes, sir." The messenger turned around and left. Suddenly changing from a harsh environment to a comfortable one, it was very easy for the soldiers to slack off. This was human nature. If they slacked off, what awaited them would be death. Unfortunately, the cruel rules of war forced the army to move slowly and cautiously. Because this was an extreme race, being cautious meant falling behind. Falling behind meant that they had no fate with becoming a divine general. Therefore, the army had to maintain the necessary vigilance while marching quickly. Although Ouyang Shuo was cautious, his enemies were more cunning than him. The army had just bypassed a small hill when the rumbling sound of horse hooves came from all directions. Accompanying the galloping of the horses was a series of whistling sounds. One could tell that it was not a friendly greeting. "Not good, we're surrounded." The troops responsible for guarding the perimeter immediately discovered the enemy and waved their flags. Considering that they were marching in the territory of the Hun, coupled with the fact that they did not have enough men, it was impossible for them to defeat the Hun army. The troops patrolling the perimeter did not spread out too much in case they attracted the Xiongnu. On the other hand, the main force maintained their battle formation and did not spread out too much. In any case, the grassland was boundless and there was no need to worry about the narrow road. Ouyang Shuo led the divine martial guards to the front of the army, acting as the vanguard. The middle troops were Qin Qiong's troops, while the rear troops were guarded by the prudent Zhang Liao. "Everyone, don't panic. Hold your ground." Ouyang Shuo was calm. He thought that the ambushers were the Xiongnu's army. Sooner or later, there would be a battle between the two. The earlier they met, the earlier they could be free of worry. This time, Ouyang Shuo had miscalculated. In a short while, the information of the battlefield was sent to Ouyang Shuo. The ambushers were actually the mutant army. Initial estimates said that there were no less than 30,000 enemies. This meant that there were at least 10 lords participating in this attack. 10? Ouyang Shuo was bewildered. According to his calculations, there would not be more than 10 lords that could walk out of the desert. In other words, all of the surviving lords had participated in this siege? Needless to say, there must be someone behind this. As for who it was, it went without saying. Ouyang Shuo led his personal guards up a small hill nearby and looked around. 30,000 cavalrymen surged toward the allied army from all directions, giving off an imposing aura that could devour mountains and rivers. At the northernmost side, where the army was heading, Ouyang Shuo noticed the army of Kill Ripper. The Mongolian warhorses and scimitars were too easy to recognize. At the front of the army was Zhou Yafu, a famous general. Next to Zhou Yafu was a group of Han soldiers. Upon closer inspection, they were the army of the main camp. On the left, Di Chen's troops were faintly discernible. On the right, the flag of the battle wolves fluttered in the wind. When Ouyang Shuo saw this, he suddenly understood. When he saw the three of them, everything that didn't make sense seemed to be explained. It was obvious that this was a meticulously planned plot. The goal was to get rid of Ouyang Shuo's group and get rid of their biggest competitor. Ouyang Shuo couldn't figure out how Di Chen and the others managed to convince the other lords to put down their grudges and work together to attack the army of Shanghai City. Because what they did was tantamount to asking a tiger for its skin. Who didn't know how ambitious Di Chen and the others were? The biggest possibility was that these leaders had already obtained substantial benefits in advance, which was why they gave up and cooperated with the Yan-Huang alliance, in order to achieve Di Chen and the others' plans. For example, they were bribed with money. Thinking about the time limit exchange that had just ended, it wasn't hard to imagine that Di Chen and the others were spending money like dirt. Another suspicious point was that the other party had come prepared. They purposely guarded the path that the army of Shanghai City had to pass through, which caught Ouyang Shuo off guard. The army of Shanghai City had the living map of the desert, Huyen Qiu, to lead them out of the desert so smoothly. Then, what about the army of Kill Ripper and the others? It was beyond Ouyang Shua's expectations that they could get out of the desert before the army of Shanghai City. Other than having a guide, the only other possibility was Zhou Yafu. Thinking about the Han army beside Zhou Yafu, Ouyang Shua's face turned cold. He never expected that Zhou Yafu would be able to influence the Han army in this era, and even influence the stance of the Han army. He had miscalculated. All these factors caused Shanghai City to be in a difficult situation. Big brother, what do we do now? Xuanlong acupoint master came from the middle of the army and galloped over. Let's split up, Ouyang Shua said. In the current situation, they didn't have much of a chance of winning. 8,000 against 30,000. Ouyang Shua had confidence in the divine martial guards, but not in the other two armies. As a result, they were equally matched with the enemy troops opposite them. As for commanding the troops, Lian Po, Zhou Yafu, Tian Dan and the rest were even better. Adding on the fact that the situation was disadvantageous to Shanghai City, if they fought recklessly, they would suffer heavy losses. Ouyang Shua wouldn't act rashly. His main goal was to complete the battle mission. As for fighting with Di Qin and the others, there would be plenty of opportunities in the future. Ouyang Shua didn't want to let Di Qin and the others reap the benefits just because of a momentary rush. Therefore, the best way was to split up and break out of the encirclement before the enemy completely surrounded them. Of course, Ouyang Shua had his own selfish motives, but he did not want others to know about it. Ouyang Shua called Zhang Liao over, and the three of them agreed on a meeting place. Then, it was the direction to break through. Ouyang Shua took up the heavy responsibility, and the army of Shanghai City would break through. Without a doubt, this was the direction that the enemy's defense was the tightest, and it was also the hardest bone. Sunlong City and Lingxi City would break through to the left and right respectively. How many troops would be left would be up to fate. Big brother, take care. Sunlong City cupped his fists and left. Marquis, take care. Zhang Liao led his troops and left. The battlefield was ever-changing, and there was no room for hesitation. After the discussion, the three armies started to break through. Ouyang Shua patted his horse and came to the front of the divine martial guards. He pulled out the scarlet knight sword. Boys, trample them flat for me and carve out a path of blood. Ouyang Shua shouted loudly. Kill! 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 What responded to him was an earth-shattering roar. The divine martial guards were fearless. Although Ouyang Shua chose to break through, he didn't want to let the enemy have an easy time. The target he chose to break out of the encirclement was none other than the Killing Destruction Army, which was also the most elite unit in front. It wasn't that Ouyang Shua was willful, but he had the confidence and consideration. Even Zhou Yafu probably wouldn't have thought of breaking through like this. Since that was the case, their chances of winning were higher. The 3,000 divine martial guards, under Ouyang Shua's personal command, boldly charged. If one looked down from the sky, they would see a shocking scene. The front, middle, and rear troops of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas were instantly divided into three groups. The front troops continued to charge forward, the middle troops turned to the left, and the rear troops resolutely went to the right. The three armies were like three sharp arrows, piercing through the sky. In front of them was the densely packed Alliance troops. This was a great breakthrough that concerned life and death. Only the brave would win in a narrow path. There was no need for any words to serve as a foil. The cavalry of both sides launched the fiercest charge at each other at almost the same time. On the vast prairie, in the territory of the Xiongnu, in the paradise of cavalry, all the surviving mutant troops along Hua Tsubing's route were involved in this chaotic battle. This was a confrontation between cavalry and cavalry, a confrontation between elites and elite. The sabers were unsheathed and the war horses neighed. The soldiers' blood began to boil in an instant. A battle that would decide the fate of the lords had officially begun. Chapter 586. How terrifying was the charge of 3,000 divine guards! Only its enemies had the right to speak. Military Kill Ripper stared at the approaching divine martial guards and felt the murderous aura coming at him. His expression was solemn. He didn't think that Don't Say Wui would choose his side to break through. In reality, the entire situation, from the plan to kill Little White, to the leaking of the battle resource points, to the successful exit of the desert, and finally to this shocking battle, Military Killbreaker was the true leader. Even Di Chen and Zhang Lang were only supporting characters. This allowed Army Kill Ripper, who had been sullen all this time, to feel proud and elated. Especially since his opponent this time was Army Kill Ripper's mortal enemy, not Say No Clothes. However, the development of the battle did not go according to the script that Military Kill Ripper had planned. Originally, Army Kill Ripper had been prepared to fight a tough battle. An army of 30,000 was ganging up on 9,000, no, 8,000 now. No matter how he looked at it, victory was in his grasp. Even if he couldn't kill them all, he could at least cripple them. With Zhou Yafu's existence, Military Kill Ripper had become Hua Tsubing's most powerful competitor. He didn't expect Hu Sezwui to be so spineless. He chose to retreat as soon as they came into contact. Damn it, that's not how the script was written, okay? Military Kill Ripper was exasperated. In just a short while, the two armies were already facing each other. The two high-speed charging cavalry clashed with the momentum of a thunderbolt. In an instant, everyone was thrown off their feet. The divine martial guard was unreasonably strong. In the face of absolute power, a slight advantage in numbers was nothing. Under Ouyang Shua's personal command, the 3,000 divine guards formed an indestructible and fearless force as they charged into the enemy. No one could stop them along the way. 3,000 lances moved at high speed, carving out a bloody path in the enemy's formation. Military Kill Ripper was shocked when he saw this. Ouyang Shua was expressionless. He would be lying if he said he wasn't angry after being schemed against by Military Kill Ripper and the others. He had to vent this anger. His target was Military Kill Ripper. Even if he had to break through, Ouyang Shua would make Military Kill Ripper suffer. After successfully breaking into the enemy's camp, Ouyang Shua's ambition grew once more. This time, he was prepared to teach Military Killer an unforgettable lesson. Follow me. Ouyang Shua patted his horse and charged forward on the left. The first to catch up was the personal guards led by Chen Damrong. Wang Feng anxiously led the divine martial guard to follow. Such a difficult change of direction was extremely easy for the divine martial guard. This change in direction caused Ouyang Shua's target to be completely exposed. To the left of the divine martial guards, Zhou Yafu was commanding the Han army under the protection of the guards. Ouyang Shua actually wanted to capture Zhou Yafu. How dare you say you have no clothes? Seeing this from afar, Military Kill Ripper couldn't help but widen his eyes in anger. A trace of panic flashed across his face. At this critical moment, Army Kill Ripper immediately led his troops to rush over to help. Unfortunately, the battlefield was in chaos. It was extremely difficult for Military Kill Ripper to rush over. The speed of the divine martial guard's charge was extremely sharp. Even though the army in front of Zhou Yafu defended with all their might, wanting to cover their commander to escape. Unfortunately, they weren't strong enough. After a while, Ouyang Shua led his troops to Zhou Yafu. Zhou Yafu die. Ouyang Shua didn't hide his killing intent. As a famous general, Zhou Yafu had personally quelled the rebellion of 7 countries. How could he be an ordinary person? Seeing the divine martial guard charging at him, he wasn't afraid at all. Soldiers, follow me to kill the enemy. Zhou Yafu unsheathed his sword and took the initiative to attack. Yes. The surrounding Han army was also iron-blooded men. Come at me. Ouyang Shua swung his azure lightning and caught up. This time, he wanted to kill Zhou Yafu personally. A famous general? Ouyang Shua didn't even put him in his eyes on the battlefield. As long as they were enemies, they would be mortal enemies. Ouyang Shua cherished talent, but he wouldn't make a mistake at this time. Clang! The crimson firmament sword clashed with Zhou Yafu's sword. Zhou Yafu's real name was Jiang. This sword was powerful and came from a tricky angle. Crimson firmament sword. Ouyang Shua was shocked, but Zhou Yafu let out a cry. The crimson firmament sword was the sword of Liu Bang. As a famous general of the Western Han dynasty, Zhou Yafu recognized the crimson firmament sword in Ouyang Shua's hand. It's the crimson firmament sword, Ouyang Shua said and thrust his sword out again. How dare you use Emperor Gaozu's sword? How dare you? Unexpectedly, Zhou Yafu was completely enraged, and his sword became more and more fierce. The sword in Zhou Yafu's hand was the most typical Han sword. Although it couldn't compare to a divine weapon like the Crimson Firmament sword, it was still a rare sword. His swordsmanship was also extraordinary. The two of them were actually evenly matched in this battle. Ouyang Shua finally realized that an emperor general was a level higher than a monarch general. It was extremely difficult to quickly take down an emperor-level general. Moreover, Ouyang Shua didn't have time to waste anymore. Not far away, Military Kill Ripper's eyes were red with anxiety as he led his troops to provide reinforcements. Once the Divine Martial Guard was surrounded, they wouldn't be able to break out. But Ouyang Shua couldn't give up just like that. Clenching his teeth, Ouyang Shua suddenly took out a talisman. Bloodthirst Talisman. After use, enter a bloodthirsty state. Battle power will be doubled and last for half an hour. After the bloodthirsty effect ends, the user will be weak for 2 days. Its effect was similar to the berserk transformation of the barbarians. This bloodthirst talisman was dropped by the Wild Boar King when the system monsters attacked the city. All along, Ouyang Shua had been busy with internal affairs and rarely went to the battlefield. This talisman, however, had never been put to use. It wasn't until his martial arts cultivation was successful that these talismans were kept by Ouyang Shua. Other than this bloodthirst talisman, there were also stamina talisman, military talisman, and other talismans. This time, Ouyang Shua was prepared to use the power of tools. Swish! The bloodthirst talisman was torn open by Ouyang Shua. A blood-red light burst out from the talisman and instantly disappeared into Ouyang Shua's body. Ouyang Shua's eyes suddenly turned red. He felt a strong and abundant power suddenly burst out from his body. The power of the bloodthirst talisman naturally didn't come out of thin air. It stimulated the potential in Ouyang Shua's body in a short period of time. That was why there was such a strong side effect. Kill! Ouyang Shua combined this power with the killing intent accumulated in his body, and slashed out. Seeing this, Zhou Yafu immediately knew something was wrong and waited with rapt attention. Dang! The two swords collided once again. This time, Zhou Yafu felt that his entire arm was numb from the shock. He couldn't help but feel shocked. After the third system update, Gaia removed the player's level and replaced it with battle power. Ouyang Shua's battle power was at the upper silver level. After using the bloodthirst talisman, his battle power doubled and he directly stepped into the lower gold level. From the silver level to the gold level, this was a qualitative improvement. Its power was naturally self-evident. At this time, Ouyang Shua was like a peerless god of death, suppressing Zhou Yafu to the point that he couldn't fight back. Ouyang Shua didn't relax at all. He used the Red Knight sword in his hand like it was his own arm. The sword moves of the killing sword were at his fingertips. The blood chi on the sword was stimulated by the bloodthirst talisman, and became more and more intense. It seemed that Zhou Yafu couldn't hold on any longer. In the distance, Military Kill Ripper couldn't help cursing. How can you say you don't have clothes? Fool, don't be so arrogant. This shout contained internal force and could be said to be earth-shattering. Even the people on the battlefield on both sides also noticed it. Hearing this, Di Chen turned his head and happened to see this scene. A trace of hesitation flashed in his eyes. To save or not to save? Logically speaking, they were now comrades and should be saved. But when he thought of military kill Ripper's arrogant expression these days, Di Chen felt very uncomfortable. Moreover, they were still rivals in subduing Hua Tsubing. If Zhou Yafu was really killed by He Wui, Di Chen would really be happy to see it happen. Thinking of this, Di Chen decided to wait and see. Master, if the lips die, the teeth will feel the cold. Lian Pu, who was standing by the side, saw through Di Chen's thoughts and reminded him. Yes. Hearing this, Di Chen was a little embarrassed. Old General Lian Pu was strong, but he didn't know what was good for him and was too honest. Simply put, his EQ was too low and he didn't know how to carefully figure out his master's thoughts. Since that's the case, old General, please lend him a hand. Di Chen was Di Chen after all. Although he was a little dissatisfied, he wouldn't easily refuse the face of the number 1 general. Yes. Lian Pu didn't care what Di Chen was thinking and rode away. However, even military kill Ripper couldn't save him in time, let alone Lian Pu, who was farther away. Of course, Lian Pu knew this. He spurred his horse forward for a distance, but then he stopped. He took out his bow and arrows and directly aimed at Ouyang Shua. Lian Pu's archery was also extraordinary. A sharp arrow suddenly broke through the air from hundreds of meters away. Pop! The sharp arrow actually hit Ouyang Shua's left arm. At this moment, Ouyang Shua was focused on fighting with Zhou Yafu. He didn't expect that an arrow would come from the sky. This time, Ouyang Shua was completely enraged. Ouyang Shua used his sword to block Zhou Yafu's sword and then forcefully broke the sharp arrow in his left arm into two, leaving only the arrowhead that pierced into his flesh. Then, Ouyang Shua didn't care about his injury. He was determined to kill Zhou Yafu with his sword. The Red Knight's sword slashed with great force and directly broke Zhou Yafu's sword. The power of a divine weapon was undoubtedly shown. Zhou Yafu was also shocked by Ouyang Shua's courage. His sword was broken, and he already had a bad feeling in his heart. 4 killing generals. As expected, Ouyang Shua launched his strongest attack. Zhou Yafu, who didn't have a sword in his hand, couldn't avoid it. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.